Oh, great. Am I muted? I hope.
Kim, can you hear me?
Brian Beercamp's wife.
Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the El Dorado County Board of Supervisors to have primarily budget review, but a couple of other items as well, 2 department matters, held this day, Monday, June 7th, 2021. With that, Kim, I know we're having some technical difficulties with our broadcast, particularly the video coverage. Can you explain what we've got going on this morning?
Yes, Supervisor Heidel. This is for our participants and our attendees. Due to the cameras being reset, we only have one angle. It will be our Chief Administrative Officer, John Ashton, and our Deputy Chief Administrative Officer, Sue Henneke, who will be presenting the items.
Very good. Thank you for that. And with that, Supervisor Parlin, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Oh, great. Everybody please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, very good. So we will move on to adoption of the agenda. So I'm just looking for an action motion by the board.
I'll move.
Second.
All right, we have a motion. Can we have roll call, please, Kim?
Supervisor Heidel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Turnbull, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Thomas, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Parlin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Novosel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Excellent, thank you. And with that, we'll move on to our 9 a.m. time allocation activity, which is item number 1. Kim, if you would please read that.
I'll go ahead and read the item, but there's just a couple clerical corrections.
Okay.
I'll state them as we go along. Item number 1 is a hearing from the Chief Administrative Office recommending the board, 1, open the budget hearing and receive budget presentation on the fiscal year 21-22 recommended budget. 2, approve the fiscal year 2021-22 recommended budget. It says item 4, but it should be item 3, authorize the Chief Administrative Office Facilities Division and the Department of Transportation to proceed with capital projects and road work plans as identified and approved in the recommended budget. It says item 5, it should be item 4, approve the fixed asset listing as identified in the recommended budget. It says 6, it should be 5, authorize the Human Resources Department to proceed with filling new positions outlined in the recommended budget. It says 7, it should be 6, approve vehicles for permanent assignment and overnight retention. It says 8, it should be 7. It says upon approval of the fiscal year 2021-22 recommended budget, direct the Chief Administrative Office to return no later than June 20th, and it says 2020, it should be 2021, with a recommendation to adopt the fiscal year 2021-22 authorized personnel allocation resolution.
Very good. Thank you for that. And with that, I will open this public hearing and turn it over to staff to start the budget presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don Ashton, your CAO. A few opening comments before I turn it over to staff. And so the board is aware we have all department heads participating via Zoom. So if there are questions of specific departments, they will be available to answer those throughout the hearing. So good morning, and I'd like to begin by thanking you for your time today, and more importantly, for your time over the past few months during which we discussed a variety of budget priorities. And I am pleased to report that the recommendations before you today were able to address those priorities you identified, including funding for body-worn cameras for our deputies, an additional $3 million in discretionary revenues for road maintenance, and additional resources and positions in the planning and building department to increase the vacation home rental code enforcement efforts, as well as their other tier 1 long-range planning priorities that you identified. So all those are included in the recommended budget, and it's still balanced, and we believe it is still a conservative budget. Due to the approach the county has taken relative to the budget over the past few years, and specifically taking a conservative approach and following the board's strategic priorities, the general fund is stable. However, as we have discussed, there are challenges with other funding streams, such as the road fund, social services, and behavioral health, that while balanced in fiscal year 21-22, may require additional policy direction as we move into fiscal year 22-23. Specifically, the need for additional general fund contributions or reductions in staffing that could impact service levels for these state mandated programs. And while the general fund is stable, my advice to the board is to exercise restraint. And if you choose to increase spending in one area, rather than increase revenue assumptions or take it out of reserves, I would recommend you identify areas to reduce spending in other areas. The reason being is we do not have sufficient funding to address all of the needs that have already been identified in future years. Likewise, the board has made significant movement in our compensation structure, but we are still short of being able to meet our goal of compensating employees at the median of our comparator organizations. In addition, I just want to remind the board and the public that there continues to be a lot of uncertainty regarding our, quite frankly, the economy of our county, the state, and the nation. There's a strong likelihood CalPERS will be lowering the discount rate this November, resulting in additional costs to the county. There's the potential for inflationary increases that could be significant, and as we are already seeing costs for lumber, steel, gasoline, and other goods significantly increased over the past 6 or 7 months. In closing, the recommendations before you, they're responsible, they are conservative, and they address many of the needs of our community while making significant investments in our infrastructure, including our roads, our buildings, and our information technology systems. So with that, unless there's any questions of me before we kick it off, I will turn it over to Emma and Sue, and they will lead us through the discussion. And I do encourage you to ask questions as we go. It's most helpful if this is a dialogue and a conversation as we work through these things. So any questions for me at this time? All right, Emma.
Thank you. Emma Owens from the Chief Administrative Office, and Kim Snow. I'll pull up the presentation. Oh, my.
Shrinking here.
Wow.
Whoa, what's going on?
We're getting lost in the tunnel.
It's a cool effect, but not for now.
Yeah.
It's because you're on the Zoom. It's just so if you get off the. Yeah, your screen sharing, your screen share. Just bring up the PowerPoint.
There we go. All right. Can we lose the next slide column somehow? Get rid of that and make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Here's a brief outline of today's items that we're going to go over in the presentation. And we're going to start with the budget requirements. So we prepare the budget according to the County Budget Act, which as from its government code, it's outlined how we prepare the budget with more information from the State Controller's Office. So sometimes if there's a lot of detail, it might be because it's adhering to that County Budget Act. And the county budget applies to the county, the special districts, and other agencies whose affairs and finances are under the supervision and control of the board. So it includes our zones of benefit, all of those things that the board has authority over. I'm going to reiterate this again, that we have to have a balanced budget. So in the recommended budget, which we're presenting now, the adopted budget, which you'll approve before October, and the final budget, which is how the budget ends at the end of the fiscal year, the revenues have to equal the expenditures. So if you want to increase funding sources, you also have to increase the funding uses. If you want to add something to the budget today, you have to decrease an expenditure or find grant revenue in order to offset that addition. So everything has to balance in the end. The budget will always net to zero.
Emily, can you pause for a second? I got a note that dial-in participant can't hear, and we had that issue once before. It's on campus. So I don't know if we have an issue with the audio not being broadcast on campus. Do you have any recommendations on how that might be resolved? Okay. Okay, well, maybe it's just one hiccup with a particular user or something, but all right, thank you. Sorry, Emily.
Moving along, the public hearing that we're having today is required by budget code. If you want to make changes to the budget today during the hearing, it only takes a 3/5 vote, but any changes following the close of the hearing require a 4/5 vote. And that's why you see budget transfers from here on out say 4/5 vote required when we're adding to the budget. This is a summary slide. I'm going to go into more depth on each of these amounts in the following slides, but I wanted to break down what total appropriations are and how they're showed in different segments in the budget. So total appropriations for the budget are $812 million. That is every special revenue fund, enterprise fund that's in the budget. That's all expenditures. A subset of that is governmental funds. And governmental funds include the general fund, the special revenue fund, the capital fund, we call the ACO fund. But it excludes, when you're talking about governmental funds, your districts, which are the CSAs and the zones of benefits, the enterprise funds, which is the airports, and the internal service funds, which are fleet and risk. And this is how the State Controller's Office and the adopted budget shows funds. So this is why we use governmental funds often. A subset of governmental funds is just our general fund. And general fund appropriations are $337 million. And that's more than just discretionary revenue. So that's all of state funding and social services and child support services. So it's more than just those taxes that we receive as a county. So looking further, you can see net county cost or departmental county cost is how we are sort of using those discretionary revenues that the board has discretion over across the departments. And that's $162 million. So breaking this down by each kind of line, looking at total governmental fund appropriations by, we call this expenditure class. You can also hear us call it character code sometimes. It's kind of the types of expenditures in the budget. We have salaries and benefits are 35% of governmental funds. It's increased by 3%, which aligns with how we project salary and benefits. Services, supplies, and other charges is 28%. That's like professional contracts. That's operating expenditures outside of salary and benefits. Large contributions for foster care assistance, other social service assistance. Those lie in services, supplies, and other charges. And that one is decreased largely due to transportation projects that are programmed differently this year compared to last year. And then we have fixed assets. And those are expenditures of items over $5,000 and large capital expenditures. So projects in the ACO fund, those are 6% of the budget. Transfers, which is largely special revenues funds hold our funding. Departments pull the money and transfer it from that special revenue fund into their operating fund. And then, so that's where you'll see those transfer expenditures, which is pulling the money into the funds or pushing the money to the operating funds. Contingencies are 11%, and this is contingencies across funds. So this is not just general fund contingency. This includes the SMUD fund, road fund, other funds, and governmental funds. Reserves and designations is 2%. And this is not the total reserves and designations. This is what we are adding to reserves and designations this year. So 2% of that is what is in the recommended budget. This is a lot lower than what we're comparing to, which is the adopted budget, because typically with the adopted budget, we have actual fund balance, and some of that usually gets applied to reserves and designations. Moving along, now we're looking at departmental operating appropriations. So where the departments are actually spending their operations, trying to exclude those funds that are just transferring the money out to those operating funds. So if we break this down by functional group, you can see general government is 11% of those operating appropriations. Law and justice is 29, land use and development is 22, and health and human service agencies or departments are 36.9. Largely the decrease in the land use and development services, again, is due to that capital projects in DOT just being less this year than they were in the adopted budget last year. So if you compare this, which is total departmental operating appropriations, to net county costs, there's quite a difference. And here you can see now general government's moved up to 25%, law and justice is 54%, land use and development is 7.9%, and health and human service departments are 11.6%. Overall, it's an increase of 9% from the prior year net county cost amount. So if I take those last two pipe graphs, you can see that there's a shift that changed when you look at total operating appropriations to net county cost. And it largely shows that health and human services, functional group, and land use and development largely have outside funding that helps offset appropriations, whereas there's a larger dependence on general fund net county cost support to general government and law and justice. Now switching to look at revenues and in comparison to the appropriations that I've been focusing on. There's different types of revenues in the budget. There's general fund revenues, which are what we talk about a lot: property tax, sales tax, franchise fees, TOT, and cannabis activities tax. These are kind of the discretionary funds that the board can apply as they deem appropriate. Then there's also state and federal funding, which is largely for mandated programs. The state has realigned from the state to the county, so we get state and federal funding to offset those costs. There's also special revenue funds, which are restricted funds for a specific purpose that you don't have as much discretion over. So looking at how the general fund is made up, and this is kind of a large table for one slide, I wanted to highlight that the general fund is more than just those discretionary revenues. You can see taxes are 38% of the general fund, but then there's a large amount of funding in state revenue, federal revenue, other financial sources, which is transferring in from other funding sources. This is those realignment funds, other state and federal funds that come into the general fund for social services, law enforcement grants, all sorts of things that make up the total general fund of $337 million. So diving into those taxes, here is the dollar for El Dorado County property tax. So this represents $1 of property tax in El Dorado County. And you can see special districts get 24% of that. The schools get 40%. The cities get about 4.7. Our general property taxes are about 23.5. And then we have 6% that comes from the in lieu of vehicle licensing fees. And so property taxes are a main source of unrestricted revenue.
Yet another point I know that we made it several times is that people don't understand when they pay their property taxes, it isn't all residing at the county. They think that they pay their property tax, it should go into roads and should go into all these things that are county services. And clearly what this shows is the county only receives less than 25 cents on that dollar that people pay their property taxes, that the primary recipient of those funds is our school systems. It goes back to the state for educational purposes, et cetera, and then special districts. So every county is different, but our particular picture is such that we only get 23.5% of that property tax dollar that people pay every year, twice a year, actually. But I think it's important for people to recognize that because there is not a large abundance of excess revenue coming in property tax that isn't being properly spent by the county. So thank you, Emma.
And this chart here shows that we've been able to closely project property tax budget, which is the brown, to actual property tax revenues over the years. And right now we're assuming in the recommended budget a 3.8% growth in fiscal year 21-22, which is close to what it was prior year. And it's close to how we're projecting things currently. Moving along to sales and
Well,
use.
let me ask a question. Did the most recent announcement that our tax assessor made relative to the commercial properties being reduced go into that 3.8% number? Because I don't know what that net decrement in revenues is going to be, but it's something we need to understand. And I'm not seeing a profile or anything else presented that really explains it. Can you help me understand that one?
Yeah, we work closely with the assessor on this projection, and so we did touch base with him when he made that announcement. We all still feel that this is a safe to conservative projection.
Okay.
We certainly have to offset that with the amount of activity we've seen in the market recently, as well. The inflation factor is double what it has, so it's gone back up to the 2% rather than the 1%. So that's what makes it so difficult to project this. So we tend to rely on trends very heavily. And right now we all feel good with where we are at 3.8%.
Okay, you still feel the 3.8% is a conservatively low projection for property tax revenue. Thank you for that, because that's the biggest source of revenue. And if we're off just a little bit on that, it can have significant impacts on our services towards the end of the year in particular. So
Yeah,
thank
one
you.
of the questions I want to ask too is does it reflect on our equipment tax that people pay in every year too? Does it reflect on that if it's going to be lowered? Will it?
So I believe that's what the assessor was
Yeah,
referring to
okay.
mainly, was
All right.
looking at that.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't understand what that really means. So
Right.
anyway,
Right.
clarify.
And that's the much smaller portion of our property tax, which is good. But again, it's hard to estimate right now how that will all play out and be balanced out or offset by the other trends that we're seeing in activity.
The assessor is off-site today. His internet connection is iffy, so he's having a hard time commenting, but he is letting me know that he's in 100% agreement with Sue's comments.
Okay, excellent. We want everybody on the same page, right? So this is good. Yeah, thank you.
John,
Yes, Sue.
just a quick comment. I've been watching these budgets for many, many years, and I like to compare apples to apples, and understanding that the June is our time for recommended budgets and September is our time for adopted budgets. And it's good for all of us board members to understand that June is a guesstimate on, where we're going to be, exactly what we're talking about. And then September comes back. It's kind of like the governor's May revise, where we kind of have a much better idea where we are. And that's why you'll see the special reserves, things like that, all of a sudden pop up, because that's where we'll have money to put into those. So just want to kind of, give you a kind of a quick overview on that if you look at what we did last year on our recommended budget, it was about 5% less. So, we're increasing it at a good clip and at a very healthy start here. So I'm very comfortable where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. And obviously, if the board chooses to make adjustments to the budget, those are basically codified in the September timeframe when we finalize everything and lock it down. So we do have a little bit of time to make suggestions as board members if we feel there needs to be a redistribution of some part of the budget. But again, it's a zero-sum game. So if we add to one particular category of service, then we need to take it away from something else. So I think as long as we keep that in mind, we'll have productive discussions. So thank you.
Moving along to sales and use tax. Sales and use tax is outlined in the Bradley Burns Uniform Sales and Use Tax Law, and it provides 1.25% of the 7.25 default sales and use tax rate to the county. Of that 1/4 cent, so 0.25% goes to transportation, and the remaining 1% is the discretionary sales and use tax for the county. So you can see we get just a little light portion there of that whole penny. So sales and use tax has changed significantly over the past 3 years or so, and you can see this on this graph here. It moved to the CDTFA, the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, yes. And with that, there's also some laws changing how it's collected in the state and dispersed to the local jurisdictions. So that's how you can see the discrepancy between budget and actual. The recommended budget brings those two lines together. on what we're projecting as actual for this year and what we are setting as the sales and use tax amount for next year, which is 15.7 million.
So let me ask a question on the sales tax forecast. This assumes that the current tax structure with respect to internet purchases stays the way it is and does not change? Because I could see if that legislation goes through, again, it could have an impact. So always looking at the risk factor. We don't know at this point. Maybe we'll have a little better idea by September, but that could be a significant correction we might have to make if that change occurs. Hopefully it does not. The board has taken position, I think a lot of counties have, to not allow that to happen, but it's just our small speak as opposed to what gets decided in the big room. So,
And Mr. Chair, we with that recent information that we were made aware of last week or the week before in conversations we've had with the auditor's office, we felt any adjustments to sales tax couldn't be based on anything substantive. So
speculation, it's all we got today.
leave it alone for now. And as you said, if we need to make adjustments, we will in September.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Moving along to transient occupancy tax, as discussed with the board on March 30th, we're recommending at 5 million. And as you can see from this chart, there has been some variation between budget and actual, and that's due in large part for a couple factors. One is the treasurer tax collector has done an excellent job of pursuing those revenues and making sure collections are accurate. And then we also have the large Airbnb contract that started in fiscal year 17-18, and that's why you can see that increase in those years there. So we're projecting at 5 million for the recommended budget. And we'll know more at the end of the fiscal year when the records actually close. So outside of those tax revenue, a large part in creating the recommended budget is trying to project fund balance from the prior year. So what is left over? Departments have a budgeted amount. It's available revenues from the current fiscal year 2020-21. And just like in your budgeting for your house, you want to make sure you have a teeny bit extra at the end of the year so you don't have not enough to pay payroll or buy those office supplies that you really need. So that's what the fund balance is in the general fund. So here's what we're projecting for the fund balance for the recommended budget. There's about 5.65 million in excess revenues, which is only about 4% of those general revenues I just talked about, which 4% is a pretty good ratio of excess. Because in revenues, we want to be conservative and have a little less, other than projecting more revenues than we actually get, and then we don't have enough to cover the appropriations we have.
So quick question on that, Emma. Is 4% generally our target year over year on excess revenues?
I'd say under 5 is the target. And this was a strange year because we lowered our assumptions in the adopted budget.
Okay.
And so we have a little more than we have normally, I think.
All right. Thank you.
In contrast to savings from revenues, we also have savings from departments. So like we said, departments budget their expenses and there's a little extra. So here we have 11.82 million in departmental savings, and that's 2.4% of total general fund appropriations. So if you add those two together, that leaves 17.47 million that we can apply as a revenue in this budget to help cover some of the appropriations in the budget for this year. This excludes two parts that are in the total fund balance amount, and that's contingency. If we don't use contingency in the current year, that's available in the next year, and usually we roll that right into contingency for the next year, so it's not really available. And the other is we make contributions to the Cumulative Capital Outlay Fund, the ACO fund. And if they budget for a project, if the project gets delayed or not completed in that year, there'll be savings in the general fund from that, and we just roll it over so they can complete that project in the next fiscal year. So that's the fund balance amount. Everything we do in the budget is to adhere to the budget policy that the board adopts. This is the final budget policy that reflects the additions the board made in February. So as we're reviewing your request, we take all of these things into consideration and try to meet all of these budget policies, like general fund contingency at 3%, reserves at 5%, the new road maintenance designation policy. All of those things we're trying to meet in drafting a recommended budget. So what is actually in the budget? High level, looking at what's the budget if you don't want to read every page of the 500 pages of the budget book. The general reserve is at 10 million, which is that 5% of adjusted general fund appropriations. Contingency is at 6 million, and these are the same as last year. As Don noted, we include the 1.3 million for the body worn camera program for the sheriff's office. We met that 3 million goal of discretionary revenues to road maintenance. There's 6.5 million for ongoing deferred maintenance of county-owned buildings. We have our CalPERS cost increases designation, and the goal on that is to have the next 2 future years of general fund impact set aside. And this year with the recommended budget, we were able to add the amount that we need to get those 2 years for future increases put in there based on current CalPERS rates, not if there's any adjustments. There's 2.3 million set aside for the fiscal year 22-23 public safety facility loan payment. So we were able to make the loan payment this year and without touching the designation that we already have of 2.3 million, so that that designation is in there to meet a future loan payment if needed. There's 500,000 to begin replacing the aging snow removal fleet from transient occupancy taxes as directed. There's 645,000 to fire districts to offset the impacts of tourism. 578,000 to planning and building for code enforcement of VHRs and to address those state mandates and tier 1 priorities. Any questions on these? What's in the budget?
Yeah, Emma, it's Sue. I have a quick question about CalPERS. The cost increases, we have no control over that. And, you know, it's always just so scary to think about increases. Are we setting aside what would be considered a healthy amount and a similar amount as compared to other counties?
I can't speak to other counties, but we're setting aside what it comes out in the CalPERS actuarial as how much our CalPERS costs will increase over the next 2 years. They project it out for quite a few years. And this is the general fund share. So it does soften the impact of being able to bring in the revenue from these every year. And as you can tell, the 936,000 is lower than prior years. And that's because we're just finally getting to the end of the impacts of the last time they lowered the discount rate. So our unfunded accrued liability goes up for 5 years and we're just starting to slow that down. So things would just kind of grow as payroll grows. But if they do change the discount rate, that will be up on that hill again instead of being on the slow hill.
Yeah,
so I can't say what other jurisdictions do other than what Max presented at the pension presentation. But we were able to do this in the recommended budget this year, and typically it's harder to do in the recommended budget because it's such
right. No,
an important
thank
task.
you. Yeah, I appreciate that because I know this is something that, you know, that there are a lot of concerns on, but again, it's completely out of our control and it is a slippery hill that we're on. So I appreciate that. It seems like we are doing what we can to try to stay at least at the game, if not ahead of it. Thank you.
But it is a firm obligation. We can't renege, we can't back out, we can't just budget, you know, negotiate. It is a commitment. So I think that's what we all need to recognize, and is that that commitment grows and we have to make adjustments to make sure that we properly cover it to the extent it's practical. So
I have a follow-up
Right.
with that, if you don't mind. So,
sure.
At our last El Dorado County Transportation Commission this last week, they noted that they're setting aside money in a CalPERS trust mechanism. Have we looked into any additional mechanisms that may help us, you know, leverage these monies?
Yes, actually, the board had directed that we look into potentially pre-funding that in a trust. We solicited proposals for that. And after reviewing the proposals and sort of looking at the whole environment where we are right now and conferring with the treasurer and the auditor, we feel that we're not in a place to recommend that trust as an option to the board right now. We will be working on a CalPERS funding policy to bring to the board. So we would then codify, for lack of a better word, what we're talking about here with setting aside future years increases. We'd go into more detail on that and come up with a plan for that. What we're doing right now is, in my opinion, a safer way to plan for this that provides the board with discretion. We have, if we lock up those funds in a trust, you lose a lot of flexibility there. And we're also subject to market losses potentially. The other thing that you'll hear people talk about is making additional payments to CalPERS. Similarly, we could make that payment into CalPERS. There could be a huge loss in the CalPERS fund and we really lose ground there. So we feel that we're better off. We've got some cash with all of our designated or designations in the general fund. Many of those are discretionary. They're there because the board has exercised discipline and made good decisions over the last few years to sock that money away. So it's there for those future needs, but the beauty of that as well is since they are discretionary, if we did have something catastrophic, we have that flexibility there, and that includes our PERS obligations.
That's a really helpful explanation. Thank you. And certainly that strategy aligns with our board policies and budget policies. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. And I just want to ask Emma really quick is, on this particular slide, I didn't see the mention of the community planning funding, which was kind of significant this year, but I did see it in the budget book. So I just wondered why it wasn't on the slide because I thought it was pretty amazing.
I'm trying to think if that 578 includes the community planning amount, and I think it does.
Was it include?
Because it's one of the priorities.
No, the 578 is the staffing for VHRs and the tier 1 priorities. You're right, Supervisor Parlin, the community planning funding, it is important. We
Okay,
couldn't
just
put
checking.
everything there, but absolutely it is included.
Very good, thank you.
We're excited about that one, aren't we, Lori?
Yes, yes, we are.
Yes.
So are our communities.
That's right, absolutely.
The budget also includes some changes to our position allocations. And so here you can see if we net the total changes in allocations, we're subtracting 8.3 full-time equivalent positions. Largely, the subtraction is due to changing program funding. So programs like the Mental Health Service Act Innovation Project, some child support programs, those positions were no longer funded. So they made sure the vacant positions were deleted with the budget. And so we also have other changes included as well. A lot of these changes you can see are, we call them true ups, and you can see them in the description of the narratives. It's basically a department had an allocation. They had an urgent programmatic need to fill maybe a senior with a 3 because they ran the senior recruitment 3 times and they couldn't get a position. So they ran it with a 3. So in the budget process, it'll look like an addition and a deletion, but really it's just truing up to how they filled that position per our personnel rules.
So I appreciate the numbers and stuff, but I do want to make the statement. The one thing that surprised me is in the area of transportation that we're not, I recognize we had a reduction in force, et cetera, things are stabilizing. But my personal perspective is despite the additional equipment we're purchasing, we should be looking at the need for additional engineers to do transportation planning and get ahead of the game. So that's kind of the one thing I think that is a soft spot in this personnel count. I don't know the exact reasons for that. I haven't tried to get involved and understand that, but I would think that given the demand and the additional monies, we only have $3 million we've been at, that there would be a need for additional staff, particularly in road maintenance and nowhere else. Mm-hmm. And I don't see that here. So that's something we can talk about later. But that's the one thing that popped out looking at the overall personnel count that we're not anticipating, some growth there. But you can have that discussion.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, John, because they've just lost 2 people just recently because of going elsewhere to higher paying jobs. We need to look at it to be able to increase the pay to these people so we can keep them, especially when we spend all that time training them and then they leave for other positions or other companies. So,
we're paying headcount a little different, but I think we need to obviously work on both.
We got to,
right?
we got to do something because it's really bad right now. They don't have enough personnel to run a lot of those equipment that we're even buying right now too.
So just what do you want to defer this till later in the day, Supervisor Heidel?
I think when we get to that, I'm assuming we're going to get to those kind of details. I just want to, of all the headcount changes that are here, that's the one that kind of surprised me is we weren't looking at an increase somewhere in the next year in terms of headcount and transportation, but just my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any basis for it other than seeing the need. And there's definitely a big need out there, but maybe there's not enough money. If you increase the staff, it really doesn't help if there's not more money to really maintain the roads.
You just nailed it.
Right there,
If
yeah.
you add positions, it's there. I mean, we already added 3 million in discretionary revenues to close the funding gap. If you add positions, that increases that gap. And we also need to keep in mind, and Supervisor Turnbull, you're absolutely correct. We have people leaving for other higher paying positions, and we compete with the private sector. And you see that a lot with county positions that also compete with the private sector. So nurses, IT professionals, it puts us at a big disadvantage. But if you can't fill the positions you have, there's really no reason to add more positions. But you need to be able to keep the ones filled. And that goes into a whole myriad of issues such as compensation. But adding positions isn't going to solve the problem if people keep leaving.
Right.
Makes sense.
You got to solve that problem, but I do think we have a shortcoming in long-range planning of things that we really need to be looking at as this county grows in its population and where that growth is occurring and how we properly plan for roadways to accommodate it.
Absolutely.
So I think we're getting behind that power curve, and that concerns me. So
Well, we're going to be receiving a huge DOT presentation
Yep.
later this month or in July, soon, to
In
talk
July.
about all of that, because it's not a good look, right, what's
Well,
coming.
And you'll recall, we had the conversation a year or two ago, and there was no interest to pursue additional revenues. So that
Yeah.
contributes to this problem.
Chair,
yes, please, Sue.
quick question. The child support services, I'm concerned with that and the combination of that and the probation, losing positions. It doesn't look like they're transferring anything, that this is truly a loss of positions, and I am concerned about those two and how they affect our youth in particular.
Yes, and I actually went and looked at the details of the child support services, and what it amounts to is we're at half the staff in child support services in 2022 we were 10 years ago. And there's reasons for that. So that's one of the biggest decrements I've seen in actual staffing. But it makes you concerned is, are we shortchanging that particular service? I don't believe we are, but it's a good question, right? It's a valid question. So,
And that's a great policy conversation you guys are going to be having, and you've heard me say it for 2 years now. We need to focus on our state mandated programs, and we tend not to, because that's not the general fund. But those programs are mandated. There are services that are required, and the policy of El Dorado County for many, many years has been they have to live within their means of state funding. If the board is going to shift that, that's a significant policy change, and eats into your general fund.
Yeah.
Now there are other reasons for child support reducing staff over the past few years. As you mentioned, Supervisor Heidel, the biggest one is revenue recovery went back to the courts. So, but that's separate. This year they are reducing by 6, and that's to live within their funding provided by the state.
Yeah, and I will echo my concerns on what that means, how that impacts our families, because it is impactful. And I realize the state is moving things around quickly when it comes to youth and family services, but I do want to make sure that that we try as best we can to cover.
Yep.
cover
And then
those.
before I see the auditor there, but I'd like Sue to comment on probation, because I don't think that has a programmatic impact, and she can explain why.
Right. You may recall that last year the legislature had passed legislation to abolish cash bail and replace it with a risk-based assessment system, which would have been the responsibility of the probation department. That there was a referendum against that was put on the ballot in last November's election. What we had to do was add the anticipated positions to probation in the recommended budget so they could get staffed up in case that program went into effect on January 1st. It was not upheld by the voters. So that was 10 positions that we had added. We have now deleted those in this budget, and we've added 3. All 3 of those positions are replacing services that had been previously contracted out in the departments. 2 of them are to provide behavioral health services in the detention center, and one of them is related to the community corrections partnership, rather than contracting out some of those administrative and data analysis services. We're going to hire an employee.
Very good, thank you.
Moving along, if you want to look back 20 years, here's a chart to show the total full-time equivalent allocations, how they've changed over time. You can see we're here with the recommended budget with 1,919.03 full-time equivalent positions.
I think the point from this is, despite the significant increase in the last 20 years in population within El Dorado County, our staffing is basically at the same level it was back in the 2002-2003 timeframe. So we are trying to get more bang for our buck. We are trying to be very judicious in the way we hire personnel and the fact that they've got the right skill sets and apply them correctly. But I think when you look at this overall picture, the predominant message that I see is the state is not sending the revenues they used to send for these various programs. And we're forced to make corrective action or come up with new revenue sources to supplement what the state should be paying for. I mean, when you talked about Child Protective Service, you get to the jail system and what's going on there. I mean, it's just another layer of those things where the state is pushing demand for services to the counties, but the revenue's not coming with it. So we're in this diminishing service capacity type of budgeting process, and it's not healthy, but it's where we are and it's what we have to do. So
Although I think
Good point.
this graph also shows our priority of increasing efficiencies in departments. And I think that this probably tells that story too, that our
Right.
departments have been very intentional about being more efficient with the resources that we have. And commend everyone for that.
yeah, we've made great strides in terms of getting more effectiveness, more efficiencies in the operations and stuff, purchasing new equipment where we can, and, you know, improving the ability to deliver services. But there is a point of diminishing return there. If you're not on an increasing revenue, particularly with the shifting of requirements, a mandate comes in and there's no funding for it. That means it's got to be taken from somewhere else, which diminishes the overall level. So unfortunately, that's what I've seen as the county budget in really the last 10 years is we're struggling with it since the decline in 2007, 2008, where the bottom fell out. And that's why you see the great reduction in staffing that occurred in that period, with the minimum being in 2011, 2012. But it's been a slow regrowth ever since then. So anyway, big picture view, right?
That's a very good point and speaks to a chart we have in the demographics section of the recommended budget. And El Dorado County has 12.1 employees per 1,000 residents, excluding the cities, which is the lowest compared to kind of our comparator counties in Nevada.
Even
and
Amador
Oregon.
County exceeds what El Dorado County is able to deliver in terms of staff per 100,000 residents. So,
Yeah,
or
Amador's
10,000
at,
residents, whatever it is, per 1,000 residents.
yeah, Amador's at 18.6 compared to our 12.1.
Yeah, just amazing. But we are where we are, and we have to find a way to try to continually bring in new revenues where they make sense, right? So.
Moving along, talking about those reserves and designation in the general fund, we can use the budget to add to our reserves and designation. Here's a comprehensive list of just the general fund reserves and designations. And you can see here with the recommended budget, we're adding 5 million to the capital projects reserve. We're pulling 1.1 million from that TOT special projects reserve in alignment with your direction on in March, and in addition to 250,000 for the Parks Master Plan. Here you can see that CalPERS cost increases. As I was talking before, you can see we're adding 936,000 based on the PERS actuarial for what it'll be 2 years from now. But we're also taking out 2 million, which is what it's projected to be the general fund share of CalPERS cost increases just for this year. And lastly, that industrial drive designation where DOT is pulling out half of it this year for use in this year, and that leaves the remaining half in the designation.
I don't know if we want to pause and let our auditor controller, I guess he's disappeared again. So I'm not sure what his messaging was, but he's welcome to come back if he'd like, and we'd certainly break the discussion. So please continue.
We're getting close. So in summary, to reiterate some of the points Don made in his opening statements, there's some budget challenges that we've tried to address in this budget, but there are things that we need to consider for future year budgets, and if there are changes in state policy and other factors. So one is the CalPERS. If CalPERS does decrease the discount rate in November, there will be significant impacts to the county in 2 years. We can't know what that impact will be now, because CalPERS may do it 1%, they may do it 0.5%, they may phase it in over a few years. So we can't project that right now until we get more guidance from CalPERS, but it is something we need to be considerate of. We have significant facility needs within the county. That includes Spring Street, as you've heard before, Juvenile Hall Project, the El Dorado Center in Tahoe. All of these are things that we may need to consider in future years' budgets. There's economic impacts. Inflation could impact the cost of expenses in the budget. It could impact a lot of other factors. This is something we need to be mindful of, and prudence, especially in those reserves and designation, helps absorb some of those impacts. And the road fund shortfall, as we were just discussing, in addition to structural deficits in behavioral health and social sciences. And HHSA, the Health and Human Services Agency, will be returning to the board before the adopted budget to discuss this more. And it sounds like the road transportation will be returning as well to discuss this more.
So I do want to pull on economic impacts a little bit, because later in today we have item 2, which talks about the cost increases for the Shikori Garage replacement project, and they are significant. So
Yeah,
what we're all recognizing is the cost of construction for materials, for labor, is just significantly escalated in the last couple of years, and people who are buying homes know that too. price of lumber, even if you're remodeling, whatever, the price of materials in particular, but also with that goes the labor, have just jumped. And we're not seeing jumps in revenue. So, and we're not seeing significant returns on our invested monies in terms of an interest generating revenue that comes in to supplement. Those are very low. So I'm not an advocate for increasing interest rates, but we do have to really focus on that economic impacts because there's a trend going on here that's not favorable. If it doesn't reverse at some point, level out, stabilize a little bit, it's going to be a struggle, not in this fiscal year, but in future fiscal years to try to really figure out how you make those match. So yeah, we're not beyond that part of it. And I think we all need to just be attentive to what's going on there.
Yeah.
Because those economic impacts can be huge and they can be almost stepwise changes, right? So.
Well, especially with lumber prices have gone just through the roof and stuff, especially T111, especially $40 a sheet. Now it's over almost 100 or a little over $100 a sheet.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable just in the last few months that it's increased that much. And a two before, a good example, we could buy them for around $2, $2.50 or whatever. Now they're over $10 per board. So it's
take our lumber mills out of our
unbelievable how much
county
it's
and out
gone
of
up.
the
Yeah.
state over a period of time. Guess what happens?
Gone up so much.
Yeah.
It's just crazy right now.
We're
Fuel
importing,
prices and everything else too. So.
And Chair,
Yes,
yeah,
Sue.
a quick comment on the structural deficit for behavioral health and social services that, is also very concerning because, of our needs for mental health services, especially that hits into our homelessness, all kinds of issues there. So, I understand and realize that we do have a structural deficit, but I'm not sure how we address that other than dipping into general fund when we have it, if we can, because that will be a new world for us, but I think we're getting there.
I think the strategic plan that's been put together in the behavioral health area is going to help with that. We're
Yeah.
really focusing on how do we get more effectiveness of the dollars that we have and maybe reorganize, restructure. So I think there is a very active role there being played by the staff in terms of trying to determine how do we address this properly and how do we become more efficient in the way we do things. So I'm looking forward to seeing where that balance comes out after that implementation, which is just now starting after a year or 2 years of it, where we level out. But I do think there's hope there that we are constructively trying to address that and figure out a better way to provide services as opposed to what we've done in the past, and a better organizational structure, better accountability, whatever it is, better means of tracking things. So I'm hoping for great improvements there. I think we've got a great plan. Now it just comes down to the execution part. So I'm
Yeah,
sure
no,
we're-
and I do want to thank staff for doing exactly that, John, is, taking a look and trying to figure out what works for our county. But the bottom line is that when we cut services, we increase our other costs of those impacts to our communities. So we need to make sure that we keep it at a level where we can afford, and we can't do that. We can't afford not to take care of those that need it most. So throw that
I'd
out
like to
there.
add just a little bit to this discussion. As I have the privilege of serving on the Behavioral Health Commission, and excited to see, there's a lot of intentional work moving forward to address exactly what you're talking about. And how do we realign service delivery with maximizing our revenue streams from the state? And so a lot of intentional work that will be coming from the board in the near future, and our staff is working very, very diligently about preserving our ability to serve our community to the very best of our ability within the funding streams available. So
Yeah, they're doing a great job. Thank you, Wendy.
they are.
So this is a great general presentation. At some point, what I'd really like to gravitate towards is a risk assessment with this, so we can somehow quantify what's the probability of these things occurring and what's the consequence. Because when I look at those 5 challenges, they all mean something different to me. But from the staff's perspective, I'll just ask the general question: which do you think is the highest risk area in terms of being able to step up and meet the needs? And I'm guessing we can't answer that unilaterally. We all have an opinion, but do we have consensus on it? I think the answer is probably no. So at some point, if we could quantify some of these things in terms of risk, then maybe it helps the public and us focus on, all right, that's really what we have to pay attention to, because that's the one that could have the severe consequences, more so than some of the others. But just food for thought.
Second to last slide here. We've prepared 2 5-year general fund projections for your consideration. One is a conservative projection that assumes much slower growth in revenues, and one is a more moderate projection, which includes just a little bit more growth, not much. And so here you can see we focused on growth in the differences between the two projections. Property tax in the conservative only grows by 3.8% throughout the full 5 years. In the moderate, we have 3.8% in the recommended budget and then 4.25% growth in the years after. Transient occupancy tax, recommending only 3% growth from the prior year in conservative, and in moderate, it would be 5% growth from the prior year. Cannabis activities tax is in the conservative, just 2% growth from the prior year, whereas the moderate, which is still a conservative projection, would be 2% growth from the prior year, and adding in basically the equivalent of another retail source in fiscal year 22-23. So factoring in these different revenues, what does it look like between the two projections? And instead of putting the whole table to blind you all, I did a summary of just what the conservative revenues and appropriations would be and what shortfall or surplus that would result in versus the moderate in the gray revenue and appropriations with the shortfall or the surplus there. So you can see the recommended budget nets to zero because of that balanced budget. It'll always net to zero. In the projected budget for 22-23, in the conservative, there's a shortfall of 0.77 million. But in the moderate, there's a surplus of 0.17. In the next year, it gets a little higher. Then you can see all the way to 25-26, the end of the projection. There's a shortfall of 1.39 million in the conservative and a surplus of 1.54 in the moderate projection.
I didn't get a chance to go back and look at the comparison we had last year, for instance, with this one, but even with the conservative estimate, it's looking better than what I remember previous years. So COVID didn't have the severe impacts without revenues coming in that we thought it would have. The CARES Act, the ARPA, those kinds of things have really helped us stabilize and not see forecast revenue deficits compared to the expenditures as planned. And that's a huge, I think, benefit to all of us to recognize that additional source of revenues from the federal government and state government are truly helping. So I don't want to always challenge why we're not getting more money when both entities, I think, really did step up and help our county, and I'm sure all the counties and cities across the country recover from the COVID. And it's a continuing process, but at least that outward year projection is looking a lot better than it did even last year, if I recall. So good news.
Actually, I do have a comment on this.
Yeah.
So if I'm reading this correctly, if we are anticipating a 3.8% growth in property tax, a 3% growth in TOT tax, and a 2% growth in cannabis activity, then we are in a deficit situation for the next 4 years, if those things are true.
If it's just that growth,
If it's
yes.
just that amount of growth. I mean,
Yes.
that is a sobering table to show what kind of growth we need in order to not be in a deficit situation with our current spending levels. That's kind of,
Yeah, I can see why you would say that, Supervisor
am I
Thomas.
looking at that wrong?
No, you're looking at it correctly.
The numbers are small compared to what they were.
I would, 7-8 years ago, those numbers at 5 years were in the $25 million range.
Wow. Wow.
And we also have to keep in mind, we do these to plan our spending and things, but the reality is every year you have to have a balanced budget.
Right.
So you will never see a $1.3 million deficit 5 years out.
No, I
So-
recognize that, but I'm saying, especially in El Dorado County where we tend to be no growth, you know, we tend to have a lot of no growth fears, fears about growth, that even at this anticipated growth of 3.8% and 3%, at the current spending levels, we will be in a deficit position, which means we have to decrease services. So, I mean, that kind of adds context looking in the future as to what we need to have a healthy, vibrant county. So interesting.
That's why we need to work on economic development and bring new ideas and new technology to our county to help increase that, so we don't end up in this shortfall in future years.
And I would argue, because the board has been working on economic development, is one of the reasons you're not seeing a $20 million deficit
Right.
5 years out.
And I would echo that, because I think it is the change that the board and staff has taken over about the last 3 years that have really started turning that tide. Are we where we want to be? No, we got a lot of work to do.
Right,
That's
we
for
do.
sure. But I think we've started venturing into that and with a much more aggressive posture, and I think it's making a difference. And we just need to continually look at that. And particularly when it comes to good paying jobs, we need to bring good paying jobs to El Dorado County.
Right.
So that our youth and the people who live here have good paying jobs locally, and they can, stay in the area as opposed to commuting out of county or something to get a reasonable salary and benefits package. So good paying jobs in El Dorado County are one of the key things that I know most of us are focused on. How do we acquire that potential?
And recognizing that housing is also a component of that, and that's entry-level housing for those people. So we have to be willing to look at this in a larger picture, that with those job creation at those different levels, housing is an important component of that as well.
Absolutely.
Yep, I just want to throw my 2 cents in there, say the same thing. Thank you, Supervisor Thomas. It does show that we have a small structural deficit moving forward if everything were to stay the same. And I would echo your comments that, because of housing, transportation issues such as that, we need to stay on top of it. And, and this does not include, I don't believe, our one-time monies of ARPA, which will help us in the short term take care of a lot of this the next couple of years. So it's helpful to remember that too.
But let me just introduce something I don't think is going to happen. But if the state or somebody was to declare a moratorium on building because of the severe drought and a lack of water supply and all those things, again, if that were done, and God help us, I hope not, because I think El Dorado County is in good shape, at least this year, for a water supply, that would totally upset this apple cart. Because once you stop construction, you stop bringing in jobs, you stop a lot of things. So there are always risks involved. Hopefully that's not one of the things that happens this year, but I do know a large part of the state is really, really short of water this year. We're not in that situation, fortunately, but you never know what can happen with emergency orders as we experienced with COVID. It's not, well, it can be a health risk related item too, if you don't have an adequate water supply for basic consumption. So thank you. Let's keep going.
Last slide. So here are the next steps for what we're going to do today and to finish the budget process this year. Now we need to discuss any additions or revisions to the recommended budget. Then there'll hopefully be the approval of the recommended budget with any changes. We'll bring back the final personnel allocation resolution to the board no later than June 30th, 2021, before the fiscal year starts on July 1st. And that'll just codify the changes that you saw on that one slide. The financial records will close in September, and then we'll know the actual fund balance carryover. Like Supervisor Novosil said, then we can prepare the final budget to adjust to those actual fund balance numbers with the revision to the budget in August or September, and then the final budget will be adopted in late September, no later than October 3rd by government code.
So I do have one go back, and it relates to our homeless funding and what we're doing there. I know there's been a large interest in a large percentage of the population, the public, asking what is the county doing? How are we spending the resources? There's been a significant change in our financial position over the last couple of years in terms of being able to fund homeless activities. But from the standpoint of what those plans are in investment, I think people are saying, all right, we've got the money, we've got the strategic plan coming. What are those expenditures going to be? And I didn't see that singled out in here, but I thought maybe at some point we can bring that into the discussion. That would be a Don Simone Health and Human Services type presentation, but I do know there's a lot of interest in that right now. So thank you, Emma.
Thank you.
Joe, would you like to speak at this point? Share your wisdom with us, please.
Good morning.
In the beginning.
Hearings, and how he does it is he uses conservative revenue estimates. Generally, the fund balance, generally the fund balance estimates, the revenue estimates included in this proposed budget are conservative. We have, compared to surrounding counties, we have a lot of designated fund balance, and we don't want to have to modify our designations, but we have a lot of money set aside for future years CalPERS, future years debt service payments. There's no requirement that we have any of that. So we've got we're in great financial condition, and we're using conservative revenue estimates. Now, of course, the one outlier, of course, now is the sales tax. From my perspective, that cannot stand. And I'm sure Supervisor Parlin will harass them at RCRC in the near future to motivate RCRC, and I'm sure there'll be pressure with CSAC. The vast majority of counties and cities in California are going to take a huge hit, and there's a few counties and cities that are going to have a huge windfall. And again, right now, what we're talking about is retroactive to October 1 on the sales tax. And as I understand it, there's nothing to prevent them from going retroactive even farther than that. So, but there's adequate revenue and there's adequate resources available for what the CAO has proposed for you. Real briefly on the Supervisor Heidal's comment, Chair Heidal's comment related to trying to find and hire additional senior civil engineers, et cetera, for DOT. In this part of the economic cycle, number one, it's a difficult time to do that. There's a lot of construction going on. There's a lot of roads being built all over California. And so we would struggle to find excellent if your board were to increase the allocation and add additional senior civil engineers from DOT. I think we'd have trouble filling the positions with excellent candidates. But most importantly, what your board needs to do, and you need to direct Raphael to help you do, is when you look at the significant road improvements that take place, Silva Valley Interchange, designed, the engineering was done by the developer. Saratoga to Iron Point, that's an improvement from the developer. So what we need to do is condition tentative maps, development agreements, specific plans, et cetera, to get the developers to pay for the infrastructure and build the infrastructure up front. It's a lot easier to inspect their work and watch them build the infrastructure than for us to do it ourselves. So that would be my comment on what's gone on so far.
Let me just say, I totally agree with you, but that's why long-range planning is really important. We can't get the developers to step up and help us with those things if we don't have a plan.
I'm sure we can.
Well, we have to have a plan to show them this is what we need to do, and here's the justification for it. So
I don't think we do need a plan. I think they need a plan.
Maybe they have one. I don't know that.
They need a plan to mitigate all the impacts of the growth.
But just adding more cars to the roadway doesn't, help us in the limit, right? You got to do something to approach what we're going to be at build out. That's what I'm looking at. What's the county going to be at build out? What do we have to do now to plan the roadways, get the developer to understand the needs for it, and start that process now as opposed to waiting till it's too late to do it. So.
And I think tomorrow may be an opportunity to try to crack that conversation, because I feel like I've been trying to get there since I've been on the board and I'm not making progress. So I think with the CIP discussion tomorrow, maybe we can.
Yeah, that's a good segue.
Open a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, Supervisor Heidel. When you were a member of the public, you and I were down there in Building C when the board was meeting down there. And what were we saying about Saratoga? We wanted 4 lanes.
Right.
And we want the developer. We don't care. It's his problem. It's not our problem.
Right. And we didn't get 4 lanes all the way down.
Okay,
so.
That's the attitude we need to take. We want solutions developed by people. We don't want to have to, let's face it, other than Emma, Wendy, and Sue, and Lori, and Ms. Dawson, we're not rocket scientists in here. We need.
I was wondering where he was going with that.
Okay. I can see, Joe.
We need their help with the solutions.
I agree.
But
It's a-
we need
it's a
them to
team
step up
effort.
big time with the solutions. That's all I've got. If there's no
I
harassment. for me.
appreciate, no, I appreciate your comments because I think
Thanks,
you're
Joe.
right on spot. You're right on target. So
Thanks,
thank you.
Joe.
Perfect.
All right. Any other comments at this point?
Now it opened up for questions from you if you have questions.
Right.
of
So
the
questions from
departments.
any of the board members on stuff that we might have skipped over too fast or go backs or anything like that before we open up for public?
I'm still recovering on the last statement. so.
We got to have levity. That's what it takes. Right? Keep us going.
Yep.
So, all right. Hearing
I can
nothing.
save my questions till after public comment.
Okay. All right. And that's probably a good
Yeah,
position to take at
okay.
this point. So Kim, if you would please announce it and open it up for public comment.
Now taking public comment on item number 1, please make sure you unmute yourself when called upon. Individuals will have 3 minutes to address the board. If you're joining the meeting by phone, press *9 to indicate a desire to comment. If you're joining by Zoom, press the raise hand button. Please voluntarily state your name for the record. Now taking public comment from Julie.
Yes, this is Julie Wilson. I'm calling in on behalf of concerned citizens of Cameron Park. A letter has been submitted to the Board of Supervisors, but I wanted to read it for public record. The letter reads, "I'm writing to you on behalf of our community action group, Concerned Citizens of Cameron Park. Concerned Citizens of Cameron Park is a newly formed, large bipartisan community action group comprised of concerned citizens in Cameron Park and neighboring communities with like-minded focus. The purpose of our grassroots efforts is to work cooperatively with citizens, community resource representative business owners, community leaders, and elected officials to address the growing rates of crime, drugs, and health hazards in our community. I'm writing to seek your support for the budget item funding for C-Click Fix, a robust, well-established request and work management tool and phone application that connects taxpayers to county resources. This resource can be used in intricate neighborhoods, community groups, and local governments with free public web and mobile tools to improve the quality of life in the places we live. We believe this application will be extremely effective, leveraging the eyes and ears of the citizens by providing a quick, easy option for reporting non-emergency matters directly to the appropriate county departments. Some municipalities use C-Click Fix to streamline their own internal departmental requests for services as well. This app provides user-friendly access to county resources, plain and simple. What is C-Click Fix? We provide simple yet powerful request and work management technology for local governments. With C-Click Fix, an organization can manage their community's requests and work all in one place. C-Click Fix is a request and work management tool that allows citizens to see an issue, open an app on their phone, take a picture, and upload it directly to the appropriate county agency, track the matter, and follow it to conclusion. This resource is already being utilized nationwide, including in the city of Folsom. Here is a sampling of departments that can easily integrate with C-Click Fix: Environmental Health, Solid Waste Management, Sheriff's Office Hot and Knob Emergency, Code Enforcement, Animal Services, Environmental Management, Public Works. What are some of the things you can report as a citizen? Safety hazards such as broken streetlights, overgrown trees or vegetation covering stop signs and other road signs, unsafe traffic corners, potholes, disposed needles, ADA issues, flooding or water leaks, tripping hazards, illegal vendors, unpermitted fruit
Comment at 3 minutes.
or others, graffiti abatement, illegal dumping, overgrown vegetation. As a community action group, we want simple, easy to adopt solution. The county should be already have the resources ready to respond to these reports. An increase in citizen reporting could not cause a
Julie, please wrap it up. Appreciate your comments, but we're trying to keep it to 3 minutes because I think we're going to have a lot of comments this morning.
Okay. So I'll summarize. We want to maintain the integrity of our community and simplify participation in our improving our communities. We ask for some of your time to review our request and research the solution via cclickfix.com and adopt the funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Now taking public comment from Andy Nevis.
Good morning, board. Andy Nevis, Taxpayers Association. I'll begin by associating myself with the comments of the auditor controller, except that I think you're all rocket scientists. So there we go. No.
Rock stars, not rocket scientists. I'm sorry. Is that it, Andy? Wow, okay.
That was quick.
That was pretty short.
Best comment ever.
Yeah, really, I like it. Okay, ditto. No. All right. Kim, do we have any other?
Did we lose Andy?
I thought, yeah, well, he was there. Now he's gone, it looks like.
Uh-oh. Okay.
There's no additional public comment.
I'm surprised. Okay. All right. So with that, we will close that part of the public hearing and we'll bring it back to the board for further discussion and then action to staff. So follow-up questions. I think, Wendy, you had some things you want to go back and hit?
I do. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the extraordinary amount of work from our staff in preparing this budget book. I did read every page of it and just really, I can't imagine the amount of work that goes to getting us to here today and all the, preparation over the last 4 or 5 months to get us ready for today. So I really thank you for all of that intentional work. I also thank our staff I had a lot of questions over the weekend especially, and thank you for your responses. Let's start with, I know we're going to talk about the CIP tomorrow, but DOT is such a critical need with the $3 million shortfall that we're looking at that we did address this year, but let's talk about maintenance for a second. So my question is for our DOT staff. Sorry about that. What is the amount of deferred maintenance on our road network? And what are we spending in maintenance and what should we be spending in maintenance to improve, not just maintain the current state of our road network? I'd just like to have I think it's important to have an overall context as we're looking at this issue.
I'm sorry, could I just interrupt? I don't think Andy Nevis was done. He has his hand raised again. Did you want to?
Yeah, I'll reopen it, Andy, because if we lost your connection, I think that's only appropriate. We'll take Andy's comment and then we'll close it back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I give you guys a compliment, and then you kick me off.
I don't think we did it. I'm not sure what happened. Sorry.
That's okay. I think it was on my end, but just real quick, I just want to thank you guys for using conservative estimates. I think it's all in all a good budget. Appreciate the CAO taking the time to talk with us last week. And finally, I would just say, as regards to the sales tax issue, what Amazon is proposing to do there is a travesty. We need that sales tax revenue in El Dorado County. So if there's anything we can do to help with that, let me know. And with that, I'm done for real. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for that, Andy.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, Raphael, do you want to address these incrementally or you got more to go, Andy? So
Yeah, I think she wasn't done
Well-
yet. Go ahead and
Well,
finish.
let's start with that question. Good morning, Raphael.
Good morning, Supervisor Thomas and Board of Supervisors. Rafael Martinez, Director of Transportation for El Dorado County. To answer that question specifically, so my budget for transportation is approximately anywhere between $18 to $22 million for specifically road fund that has to do with maintenance of our county's infrastructure. Approximately $9 million of that goes towards the roadways, plus or minus, depending on how gas tax and property tax comes in that year. And really, if you want to properly maintain our roadway infrastructure, similar to a ZOB, which we're going to have a discussion on tomorrow, you're looking at approximately $12,000 per mile. If you were to equate $12,000 per mile to our county roadways, you would be looking at us spending approximately $13 million on roadway repairs and rehabilitation each year, which I just said we're spending currently $9 million. So we are about $4 million short each year in terms of proper roadway deferred maintenance and repair of our infrastructure.
That is a really helpful number, I think, for us to keep in mind as a board. So thank you for that clarity. So my last follow-up question on that is, recognizing that while we're spending 9 million on maintenance, we should be spending about 13, and that our 1.6 million in general fund reserves for road infrastructure isn't possibly enough, what areas of revenue generation have the most potential for increase in your opinion? Because that's something that this board is going to have to tackle in the years ahead.
So currently, right now, there's only a potential of two, and Dawn alluded to this a few minutes ago. I brought before the board the deficiencies that DOT was having in terms of keeping up with its deferred maintenance and its PCI, and that a lot of the damage that was done to our infrastructure back in 2017 was due to not being able to keep up with that deferred maintenance. And so really the only locations that we have for a potential of increased revenue would be something separate of where we're getting our revenue now. Currently, we get our revenue from either property taxes or we get it from gas tax. We all know that property taxes go up and down, and gas tax, even with SB1's increase, has slowly been showing decreases as well. So really, the only two alternative methods of increasing our revenue streams would be through a DOT, TOT increase, or a sales tax increase. Now, the one that I brought before the board about a year and a half ago was for sales tax, and that was considering a potential quarter-cent sales tax. And then a potential for TOT would be maybe a 3% increase to TOT that would go to transportation. And each one of them have their pluses and minuses in terms of the difficulty and how much they would bring in terms of revenue. But those currently are the two alternatives that we have in front of us today.
Thank you, Raphael. Appreciate that. All right.
Yeah.
Have a couple questions for other departments then. Let's talk about homelessness. Following on Chairman Heidel's question, is Don Simone available? Okay, great. Should I wait for him? Okay.
He is online, so go ahead and ask your
Good morning,
question.
Don.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can. Thank you so much. All right. So in the summary of the budget on page 6 of our budget book, it notes that the recommended budget includes 14.3 million in state and federal reserve to be used to prevent and address homelessness in El Dorado County. And as we all know, there's a lot of interest in this area, as Chairman Heidel already alluded. So Don, can you clarify what this means and how we will be moving forward with more concrete solutions or proposals to address homelessness in the years ahead?
Yes. So pretty good timing. The board's going to get a memo from me this afternoon, kind of updating on the status of what we're doing with homelessness right now, because there is an awful lot going on statewide and locally. So you're right. The 14.3 million that's referenced in the budget was really pursued for specific activities that are prescribed by the state. And HHSA has been working with the EDOC, our continuum of care, to utilize those grants within the state's prescribed eligible uses. So that is a number of the grants we received both prior to and during COVID. Beyond that, Supervisor Heidel also referenced the fact that we along with EDOC are restarting the 5-year strategic plan on homelessness. That is already underway, and I will be sending you an update on that as part of this. What you don't have in the budget today is our efforts around ARPA, the American Relief Act funding that is coming, as well as some of the information that is in the governor's May revise. So our CAO has established a July 31st deadline for departments to get our American Relief Act funding requests in, and HHSA is putting together those proposals now, And we'll have what I hope to call a sizable proposal in the area of homelessness within the county. And then again, may revise, there are a number of things the governor has called out in that budget, including the CalWorks Housing Support Program that we will get an additional allocation for this year. There's a housing disability advocacy program that we're expecting additional allocation here locally as well. The governor's got something he calls Bringing Families Home, which deals with a number of families in the child welfare system. We are hopeful to get additional allocation in that area. There's also a home safe program that will bring us more revenue to deal with supporting and providing safety and housing stability for individuals that are involved in our adult protective services clientele. You guys also know about Project Roomkey. We were getting ready through EDOC to close that down in April and May. And then the state came out and has provided additional funds. So EDOC had an emergency meeting a few weeks ago and voted to continue operating Project Roomkey through at least the end of August with that funding. Another thing I think that's very exciting right now is the American Rescue Plan Act appropriated about $5 billion nationally for new emergency housing vouchers. And El Dorado County is going to receive 70 of those vouchers, which is nearly a 19% increase in vouchers for our public housing authority. So that will really help our homeless efforts. I guess the last thing I'll probably mention is the property acquisition. As your board is aware, we're actively involved with the potential purchase of a property. We are now working, facilities is on performing the due diligence for that property. And then we will be, you have approved our CDBG grant application. We're looking for Home Key Round 2 to pair with that to have enough funds for a significant purchase. So those are just to give you a little bit of a taste of what we're doing, and you will get that memo later today that will give you more details about all of that.
Right. Oh, thank you so much.
So on that vein, the navigation center and planning for that, I know it's in the early talking stages and stuff, and it's part of the strategic plan, but does the memo include some information on the kind of time frame we're looking at trying to establish that?
Yeah, there is a time frame for that 5-year strategic plan to be completed this year.
Okay, and then how about the conjugate winter sheltering? Is there something in there that would define what our plans are there?
I'm sorry. I'm not getting that granular in the memo because we want to make sure the strategic plan goes through the process, and through that process, we'll get a little bit better idea of where we would rank the need for the navigation center. And I also say that if you think about the property that we are now looking into, you may be able to kind of revisualize that as a navigation center, but it has a non-congregate aspect to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. All right, thank you. I wasn't sure what was in the memo. I was just trying to determine what degree of detail you're providing, but it sounds like some of that's still yet to come, obviously, with the strategic planning rollout. So
yes.
Right. And then just one more question. I had a lot of questions over the weekend, but they were answered by a staff, but which I don't need
I
to.
have one more for Don while we've
Oh,
got
sure,
him, if
you
that's
bet.
okay.
Absolutely.
Don, seniors, obviously, when I look at the demographics that we have in the budget book, it shows that we have 29% of our population in El Dorado County that's 60 years and over. And if you drop that down to what AARP considers a senior and take it down to 50, obviously it's a lot higher percentage than that. But I'm getting a lot of questions about our senior daycare facility and needing to reopen that. And it's not a budgeting issue is the point I'm trying to make. We're not cutting short on those budgets. We're not pulling back. It's primarily driven by the state again, in terms of what we can do to reopen the senior daycare, the senior centers. Could you just comment on that a little bit relative to the budget? Because that's what this is all about. It's not a budget issue, in my opinion. It's a mandate by state organizations. So,
yes, you're right. A couple of things. We did increase our budget ask in the area of senior nutrition this year because we are seeing such an increased need during COVID And we expect that need to continue at least through the 21-22 year. So you see, I think about a $500,000 increase in a general fund request. However, that was before the American Relief Plan Act came out, and we are thinking we may be able to shift that expense into that funding. And you're right about Senior Day. I believe I sent your board a memo just less than a month ago. We are gearing up to send you another one here probably mid-June. We are working, our staff is working with the state to look at what facility needs will be required by the state that were not required prior to COVID. Certain policies and procedures that around COVID and all of the masking versus vaccinations and those elements we have to have in place. That is new, and then we need to resurvey the community to gauge what is the interest, so that as we look to reopen, once the state kind of gives us the final thumbs up, that we're able to do so safely and also being fiscally responsible. But it is not a funding issue right now that's keeping us. It's just working through all the protocols the state wants us to have.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just
John, could I jump in there on that?
Please do,
There's been
please.
thank you. There's been an interest for senior daycare up in Tahoe too, and I hope as you move forward, you can, I realize that would be a whole new area for y'all, but as we talk about senior daycare, I'd certainly like that conversation to include the Tahoe area too.
Okay, we can do that.
Thank you.
Very good. Back to you, Wendy.
All right, I think that's all I have for you, and Dawn, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it. I guess my last question, jumping to a totally different topic, is cemeteries. And I know it's not a large issue, but in the budget book, it was interesting to note that we have 1.5 full-time employees in that, and a reduction in revenue of $34,000. And I know that there is a lot of unmet needs in our cemeteries. And this was highlighted to me over the Memorial Day weekend. I received a text from a constituent saying there was a lot of obscene graffiti in Union Cemetery over Memorial Day weekend. And it was really offensive. And unfortunately I was out of town, or I would have gone and cleaned it up myself. But this lady went in and cleaned it up because she wanted, folks to have a proper reverent experience as they went to, honor their loved ones in these cemeteries. And it brought home to me that the need to really look at this. So, I'm not anticipating anything right now, but maybe looking forward to in the recommended budget, and come September, I might, be working with staff to look at this. So my question is, what is the state of unmet needs in our 17 cemeteries, with recognizing that we only have 1.5 full-time employees dedicated to that? Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Supervisor Thomas. Chris Perry, Assistant Director of Planning and Building, also Cemetery Director for the purposes of this discussion. Most of our unmet needs are related to a number of the following items. I won't go through the full list. We can have obviously a greater conversation. I'll bring a work plan back to the board sometime probably later this summer, if that makes sense for your board. But a lot of landscape maintenance needs. Obviously, we want to reduce any fire risk if there's overgrown vegetation in any of our cemeteries. We have the need for ground penetrating radar to identify unmarked graves. We have a backlog in quitclaims and forms. We're currently in the process of digitizing old burial records. And each cemetery kind of has its need, right? So Placerville Union has repair needs. Middletown has erosion control needs. Mormon Island has improved access needs. Several of the cemeteries have section and row signage needs, and so on and so forth. So yes, there are unmet needs that provide a challenge for 1.5 FTEs. And as you're aware, the cemeteries operate in a constrained resource environment. We rely mostly on the general fund. We actually do raise $34,000 in revenue each year from burials and sale of plots, et cetera. And that slightly offsets our appropriations and brings our net county costs down a little bit, albeit not nearly as much as other jurisdictions. Most other jurisdictions have special cemetery districts that can fund or at least partially offset some of the costs of maintaining cemeteries, which means they're less reliant on general fund than, of course, El Dorado County is. We do have a small group of volunteers that steps up. As you mentioned, there's a volunteer in Placerville that took care of that graffiti. Obviously, we as a staff want to make sure that, we can take care of all the needs of the cemeteries moving forward. I will say, there are kind of three ways that we can think about funding cemeteries. Obviously, the way we do it in El Dorado County is with general fund. There's also a model Pioneer Memorial Parks. We can have a wider discussion about that at a later time. And also forming special district, as I just mentioned. And the last time your board had that conversation was in 2019, when staff brought forward a potential formation of a special district. At that point in time, the board opted not to form a special district and potentially have this conversation at a later date, potentially for the November 2022 election. So that's kind of where we are right now with all this. I don't know if there's any other specific questions that you might have had, but I'll go ahead and stop there.
No, thank you so much. And just kind of look forward to having maybe some more discussions in the months ahead.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I would add to that, Wendy, if you're really truly interested in this, to go back and listen to those video recordings of our prior discussion, because we talked about it extensively.
Okay, great.
And I love cemeteries, but we have very frugal taxpayers here, so we have a
True.
bit of a conundrum. And we did have, I think did we have two discussions? At least two pretty in-depth discussions on this topic. So I think you may benefit from watching those. And I can help you if you want some help finding that.
Great. I was not aware of that, so that'd be very
Yeah.
helpful, especially as we're looking at perhaps revenue generation for our roads. Yeah, we
Right.
got to be careful with that. So,
Yeah.
okay, thank you very much. I'm
I
done.
just want to add to that, and Chris knows that our private cemetery that our family is for generations, since 1908. A lot of my family's been buried there and stuff, and we maintain our own, and we've had bylaws since 1915. So if everybody could follow the same kind of procedures and stuff that we put together and stuff, it would be great for a lot of our cemeteries, and maybe that's something we could look into.
So Chris, while you're here, and I'm assuming Tiffany may be here, I have a question relative to housing, and I'm not sure if you want to address that or have Tiffany address it or whatever, but recognizing the need for affordable housing, we've mentioned that somewhat, recognizing the price of homes sold in El Dorado County on the median for it is in excess of $652,000 and growing every day. I'm questioning whether or not we have the right planning staff to really look at this housing thing that we need to address, given the RENA numbers, et cetera. And CJ and the staff have been fantastic in supporting this. And I know we've used outside consultants, but are you comfortable that we have the proper level of staffing to really get some things done here? Because I'm looking at the need to probably change some zoning definitions and other things, which gets into planning and, just more than just looking at the numbers. But are you confident that this budget has the proper staffing to address our housing needs and do it correctly? Tiffany's on.
Tiffany Schmid, Director of Planning and Building. I think that with the additional resources that the board is providing planning and building this year, specifically the two senior planners, I think that'll give us an opportunity to look at our policies. I think our existing staff are doing a fine job addressing the required housing policies, right? So we're meeting our state requirements regarding housing. We have the additional senior planners coming in that'll help us look at some additional, implementing some additional policies. But the delivery of housing is a much bigger question than just having adequate planning staff involved. It has to do with our development policies in general in our general plan. And many of those are difficult and can put up obstacles to the delivery of housing. It has to do with our transportation policies, which are voter initiatives. it's a really big question, and just putting additional staffing resources in place won't necessarily make delivering housing, the delivery of housing happen. So I think that we need to look at it from a broader county perspective before we start deciding how many resources and where those resources need to be. We're certainly receiving pressure from the state because we are short on delivering our affordable housing. So that's why we're seeing those SB 35 projects. The state is not slowing down on developing additional legislation that they're pushing down to local jurisdictions to continue to force the delivery of that housing. So it's definitely something that we need to look at in more detail.
Chairman Heidel, can
Yes.
I add to that just a little
Sure,
bit?
please. Yeah.
Prior to today, Supervisor Novacell and I were looking to bring an item with building and planning to fund a presentation to the board on missing middle housing sometime later in the fall, just to kind of start the conversation to understand what are the options to get our community thinking, because it doesn't have to be just a single family home or a large apartment complex. There's a lot of creative ideas out there in terms of housing. And then that could, our board could have a discussion about that and see where we want to go on that. And, staff said they would be able to do that without, it's a relatively very, very, very minor, cost allocation for a presentation on that. But then next year, following maybe board discussion of housing, I think, we can have a broader discussion on how we feel about those policies and what our options are. And I think this is going to be a very fluid and dynamic conversation going forward. So.
Yeah, I would agree. And I will just throw in mobile home housing as a source of, affordable housing for a lot of our current residents, and potential to grow some of that area of housing stock available. That's one of the things that we definitely need to include in that broader discussion. What I'm struggling with is how we have that discussion. If you bring something forward, we'll get a presentation, but the history of these things is it kind of goes dormant unless there's a specific action. Are we going to try to allocate staff to do a more detailed analysis of what we need to do to make the changes to facilitate more housing? I mean, I'm not sure what the ultimate end game is that you're talking about with the discussion. So that's something I think we need to consider.
I think that would be a discussion after the presentation,
Okay.
to see which way this board would like to explore the issue.
So you think an ad hoc committee or just not known?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me jumping in real quick, I will say that, up until we're working on the VMT issues, which necessarily jumps in not just for transportation now, but into housing because of, there's a direct correlation there between housing and transportation if we go onto the VMT standards. So I think it is very relevant. I don't know how we get it together, but it definitely needs to be addressed as far as understanding our new state regulations of VMTs.
Well, that's a good point, just to talk about regulations as a whole, because, I think I mentioned it in Twos and Froms recently that the Board of Forestry, has come down. They're in that process of creating their, and I forget the name of it, but anyway, very restrictive for housing, and it will, if they implement what they're proposing right now, rural counties will build very little. So I think at this moment in time, we have a lot of pressures to do a lot of different things, and it feels like they're all conflicting. And I do think that that's part of the problem is, you went to that presentation, I go to my presentation, and every agency in the state has a different idea. So water, fire, you name it, traffic, they're all doing something different. And that could be the presentation that we need. And the bigger problem is they're constantly changing. So it is difficult to figure out where things are headed, in my mind. That Board of Forestry decision is going to be huge. And I was I was at the, what's the name of it? The North State Builders Council last week. And just, that they're going, Lori, nothing will get built because of the road widths in El Dorado County. In most of my district, the more rural areas, nothing can be built. It'll be overwhelmingly expensive to do so. So I don't know, maybe the first conversation to have is more, what are our constraints? What's the reality? And then from there, maybe we can explore options. But yeah, I think it's really concerning where we're headed. So that might be the more fundamental conversation to have, is those constraints are huge.
Well, I think along with that, what are our constraints and also what are our opportunities, understanding both.
Yeah, but I think that's too big of a conversation when quite honestly, that presentation just on the constraints with so many different agencies giving us these regulations, it's huge, isn't it, Tiffany? I mean, really, to keep up with all of them. And then Sue, has her additional layer in Tahoe that's even more constrictive. So yeah, getting tough to keep up.
Well, it's the inconsistency of the programming. Everybody's doing their own thing from the state, and it's a jumble, and
Yep.
nobody can tell where you're really going to go with any of it. So
Yeah,
that's the conflict and overall. So we need to have a higher level discussion, but we obviously are going to deal with arena numbers and all those things as part of the planned activity here. And that's my near-term focus, is to look at how do we at least plan for and facilitate trying to make that missing middle housing happen to the best of our ability, and other sources of affordable housing. So I look forward to the discussion that you'll bring forward, and we'll incrementally take it. But this is budget related, so I just want to make sure from a budgeting standpoint, we're not overlooking something that we should be including, because now's the time to talk about it before we finalize it in September. So again, thank you. Other comments from board members? Any questions?
Yeah, Chair, we have some money budgeted for the body cams for the sheriffs. And I looked at the specifics on the sheriff's budget. I didn't see anything in there for the program of now that you have the body cams, how do you make it transparent? Do we have an oversight committee? And is the sheriff in charge of somehow getting reports to us? I guess at some point we're going to be given that information, but I'm concerned that I want to make sure we have money in the budget, or that he has that built in to where we have proper transparency now that we have the body cams once we get them in place.
Looks like our undersheriff has come on, so hopefully he can answer that for you. Brian,
Great, thank
welcome.
Hey, good morning, Supervisor Noversell.
Morning.
We're still at the beginning of that project. We've outlined the needs of the project. Right now, we're putting a team together to get the policy and procedures set out before we, take off on this project. So that would be included in there. We are doing it in-house. So the staff that we have requested and have been approved will be reviewing that data. And mostly all that is for PRAs. As you know, we get quite a few of those. But at the request of certain videos that, we would be able to make those available depending on the type of case.
Okay, very good. Then I take it you have looked at programs of how that works with public transparency and all that. And you're comfortable with what we have, with what you're going forward with.
We are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Okay, with that, not seeing any more board comments, I do want to go back to Julie's comment and let staff comment on the app that she's referring to. I'm seeing a lot of different apps being promoted. We have Facebook, we have Nextdoor. I'm not sure how much more we want to get into that, but I wanted to give staff a chance to respond.
Before I respond to that, Supervisor Turnbull, were you going to bring up anything on SeeClickFix?
Yeah, I was gonna, that's
Okay.
something that we're gonna put on, add to that. But also, I forgot to also add that we are also in the budget and stuff, we're gonna bring somebody back from environmental management and that worked directly just on this cogeneration plant. And Greg just recently retired, and we're gonna bring him back part-time.
Well,
Certain amount of hours, that's gonna be part of that discussion on that budget, so.
I think now's the time for you to bring those two requests
Yeah,
up.
the request up now that,
So-
because I think it's going to be a good thing. It's going to be good for our county, but also working with McClintock. Lori and I met with him and stuff, and he's all in favor of it. So I think there's going to be some federal money that we might be able to get there to help get this thing off the ground and stuff like that. And I look at it this way, you know, we were talking about it and Tom was saying that, you know, he was just kind of worried, you know, it's going to be a kind of a deficit. I said, well, look at it this way, Tom. I said, you know, even if we lose $1 million per year, look how much we spent just on the King Fire alone, which $480 million on one fire. So this is going to be a great thing for our county, especially when we do good forest management. We're talking also about bringing logging back to our county, which would generate more money for our roads and to bring more higher paying jobs for our county. So we're looking into that. He's looking into that with us and we're on board with it. So we have a meeting with a lot of the players and stuff here be soon. It'll be the head of the loggers, which is DeAugustini, was not John, his brother. And he's the head of the union on that. And then we're Sheriff Pacific, and there's going to be some big players we're going to be meet with. This other thing with the quick fix. Anyway, I think it's a great thing. We need to look into that because I think it'd be good, especially when this app and stuff will help a lot of the people and stuff when there's concerns in the area, especially like in Cameron Park. I know there's been a lot of concerns down there with people breaking into houses and stuff down there. I know some friends of mine that have moved away because of it. They've had issue with the homeless and stuff there. But I think it's not only just that, it's the roads, it's brush clearing, it's illegal dumping and stuff. And if that thing can pictures and stuff that they can deal and send it to these different departments, and the departments can act on it a lot quickly. I think it's a great thing. I think we need to look into it, and I think we need to look into setting money aside for that.
So Supervisor Heidel, at the request of Supervisor Turnbull, staff did look into the what C-Click Fix was. I mean, we didn't know what it was 3 months ago. City of Folsom does use C-Click Fix. Staff from my office and DOT went and saw a demonstration of it and talked to the City of Folsom staff to get their thoughts and opinions on it. As far as we know, there's no other county in California that uses C-Click Fix. It's really a city application, and we can explain some of the reasons why in a minute. But before I go there, if Raphael is still on the line, he actually worked in a jurisdiction that used C-Click Fix. So I'd like to get him to give his perspective of that application. And I believe DOT also looked at it a couple of years ago, if I'm correct, Raphael.
That is correct, Don. Approximately 4 to 5 years ago, my staff went to visit the City of Folsom to get a perspective and get an understanding of how they're utilizing C-Click Fix to basically illustrate some of the complaints and or document some of the complaints that the residents have on a regular basis, whether it's potholes or signage or striping. And what it came down to is essentially there is a cost that comes attributed with it that then we would have to incur on top of our original or current expense and budgetary process. And as you were mentioning, I was part of an agency back in Southern California when I used to work for the city of Corona, where we incorporated C-Click Fix back in 2014. And it's alluring in the fact that it gives residents another platform to contact its local municipality to report problems and or issues that are ongoing on a more expeditious and more quick manner. The problem is the efficiency of that. We were having troubles trying to correlate whether those issues were in city jurisdiction, county jurisdiction, and or Caltrans jurisdictions. So it then provided additional legwork for, at that time, my staff, trying to synchronize where the actual problems were and which department it was. Ultimately, we had to dedicate additional resources in the form of additional staff to incorporate that program successfully. So my only hesitation would be that we look into this carefully and slowly and make sure that it wouldn't be an additional burden to either my staff or environmental management staff or any other staff that would have to either manage or administer the program.
Thank you, Raphael. I know it's a for fee type of app service, but it's good that staff is looking into that. I'm sure there's going to be new proposals as time moves on. This one sounds like it's got a pretty significant history. I guess the concern I have is, do we get our value out of it? And it does require more staff than to monitor. We have the 211 phone system. If you need the services and stuff, you can call in and they're referred for any number of purposes. So, I mean, that the larger matrix you have to communicate with the community, the better you are. But it has to be things that people are familiar with and use on a ready basis, in my opinion, to be effective. So they can grow, they can be expanded, but I think the analysis, the continued look is the important part, unless you're proposing putting this into the budget as a cost element. And then we have to look at the staff too. It's not just the software, it's the staff.
Yeah, well, I think that's something that we need to look into a little bit, maybe a little bit more. But I think that we got a little bit of time because, we got to finalize the budget in September. It'll be about, so I think we could bring it forward and look into it a little bit deeper and stuff and see if there's how much it's going to cost us, and then how much that people would love that, that app and stuff, and how much input we can get from, the public and stuff on that and how they feel about it.
I think there's a lot of apps. One that I've always wanted us to look at was OpenGov, because that gives us some transparency, allows people to kind of, we have a clunky Legistar system. So, if we're going to look at that, I think we should look at other alternatives also, just to see what's out there, frankly.
Yeah, as soon as you look at it, it'll change again. So, I mean, that's the other thing. It's a fast evolving field. So, all right. So we're not going to propose and put anything in the budget right now. It's a study. Let's see what happens in September. The discussion about Greg Stanton, I don't think that's something that's unique to this budget, or do we need to talk about adding resources for that? He's a retired annuitant.
So I'm going to shift it from the name of a person, that we
Okay.
don't talk about people in the
sorry
budget.
about that,
That's all right.
Yeah.
There, in the board strategic plan, there is a priority to explore biomass and cogen. We don't have the bodies to do that right now. It has become a priority. Not only is it in our strategic plan, it's a priority of our CRC. It's a priority of SOFAR, which this board is a partner with.
Yep.
And it's a priority of Pioneer Energy. And it's probably a priority of many others that I haven't named yet. In conversations I've had with Supervisor Turnbuck, because I know this is important to him, and he's been having conversations with Congressman McClintock on it, I'm hopeful to have funding in the budget to bring a recommendation to the board to allocate perhaps up to 1 year of part-time salary to have a subject matter expert come in and assist staff with that feasibility and project. What would that project look like, and how would we move forward?
Right. And Greg, well, I'm not going to say his name. Okay. But anyway, he's on board with it. And I think it's going to be a great thing for our county, especially to move to the future, especially when we're having these blackouts and stuff with PG&E and stuff that's going on right now too. So, and not only that, it's going to create more jobs to our county, which we need, and then higher paying jobs. So I think something that we need to do and look into it. And I think everybody is, I see that's on board on it. Like this Pioneer Energy is really in favor of it. They're working on, trying to get this done, and the SOFAR group. And also I met with some scientists and stuff, and actually some professors from UC Davis, and they're in favor even of it too. And so that's kind of a great thing, especially what our future could bring to our county.
I think everybody recognizes the benefits. It's the cost. It's
Right,
it's
exactly.
it's the investment that it takes to get it set up and how you do it. Because if you don't do it properly,
That's
it's a
one of-
loss leader.
Yeah, that's the
So-
reason why
Has
I've
been
reached out to the
discovered, so-
congressman,
So do we
anyway.
need to allocate funding into the budget to hire a consultant for this project, or is it already in there, Don?
It is not in there right now.
Okay.
Keep in mind, we do status quo budgets.
Right.
And these are new, the two things we're talking about right now are relatively new
Mhm.
that haven't come up. I would ask that the board not allocate funding today, because then I'm gonna have to cut funding somewhere else.
Right, right.
If the board, and I'm assuming the board hasn't changed your mind, because it is in our strategic plan, but to ask staff to make it a priority to be considered in the final budget in September. Because we
Okay.
will have, in all likelihood, we will have higher fund balance than what we're projecting now. We typically do, and I think this year it's going to be even larger because of our very cautious revenue projections as a result of COVID that aren't coming through. And, there may be opportunities for other funding streams to be able to explore that. With everything happening with forest health and sustainability. We
Correct.
need to look at all of those things.
Right.
And we just haven't had an opportunity to do so yet.
And I do want to add also another piece of the big puzzle that this effort could help with is our SB 1383 initiative with organic waste diversions
Right,
out of
right.
landfills, which is
Mhm.
a huge burden that's coming that we so far there hasn't been any relief from the legislators on that. So it's a requirement that's coming really hard and fast at us, and this could be a piece of that puzzle. So I'm very excited about that also.
And I agree, that's the more immediate concern. And
Yes,
I think
it's-
we have to be cautious not to
Yeah.
look at something that's a 3 or 4 year venture versus something that's going to be on top of us next year, really, and, start
Right.
marching down that
and
road.
like-
So,
Like I visited a facility that was in Kenosha and stuff, and they have a facility, a biomass facility there that burns garbage and also burns green waste, and it produces 2.1 million residents for electricity. It's awesome. It really is that facility, what it can do. So that's something we have to do because our county is going to be, like John was saying, our lawyer, we're going to be responsible for our own garbage. We ain't going to be garbage. We're not going to be able to haul it anywhere else. So we got to do something with it. So this is something that we need to look into the future and put this together to get this done.
So to get clarity, so then the budget, the ask is for allocate money for a year to hire a consultant to basically do a feasibility study on that? Is that what the budget ask would be? Or,
It wouldn't exactly be a feasibility study, would it? Would it?
well, an
wouldn't it be
expert
more
to
of a-
explore it?
To explore the implementation
yeah.
of biomass and cogen.
Yeah.
And
Because
all the
they're,
environmental issues that goes along with it.
I just don't want to. I don't want to label it.
I'm just wondering if we
yeah.
get anything out of it if we don't have a concrete plan.
Right.
Well, and
Right.
collaboration of various agencies, because
It's
without
huge.
the National Forestry Service participating in this and figuring that part of that,
Yeah,
without the federal government helping subsidize it, without the state government recognizing the
So-
need for it, I don't want to have the county get out in front because we don't have those resources. So,
well, and I will just, and Supervisor Heidel, maybe I didn't say it well, explore to me means coordinate all of those. Right now, we have no person
okay.
to coordinate all those communications. There's no one to do it, and they are happening.
They are happening.
And the longer we don't have someone doing it, the further behind we're going to get.
I agree with that, the coordination to work on
Right.
collaboration and stuff, yeah, but I don't think it's a feasibility study. It's really being part of being at the table when all this discussion is going on to figure out what our participation is and how we can fundamentally get it implemented on a regional basis, maybe before county basis. And we need to look at the practicality of what kind of costs are involved. 'Cause
And
they're huge.
feasibility is a piece of it, I think. It's a piece of it, but we have to be because with the SOFARs working with SMUD right now, up in the Crystal Basin on one, and I think the one in Loyalton just fired up. And I mean, there's just so many different agencies. If we don't have one person, because like I'm going to different meetings, we're all going to different meetings and hearing about these different efforts. So we need one person that
Take
we
this on.
can point to in El Dorado County and say, this is our person taking the lead, so that they're gathering all the information, and that would include feasibility as a piece of it. That's why I didn't want to limit it to just call it a feasibility study. Does that make sense? when
Yeah.
you-
So I think
okay.
it's full-time, not half-time. Is that what I heard?
No, I think it's part-time.
Yeah. It'll be
part-time.
part-time. It'll go in like this,
Yeah.
waves
Okay.
of, yeah.
If you don't need direction today, in your opinion, we can address it in September when we actually know the fund balance carryover, the final carryover numbers, all that stuff, fund balance.
That's what I am recommending, because if you add funding today, you're gonna have to take
Take away
funding
from
from somewhere
right.
else.
So, all right.
Yeah.
So if you're
Something
okay
else.
with
I'm
that,
not- no,
I
I'm fine
agree.
with it.
I think we look
I
at it in
think
September,
this
but we
was the
definitely
time.
put it on the discussion list of things that we have to look at in terms of adding resources for staffing as appropriate. But I think
That's
we
right.
need to get a better definition a little bit of what this role is going to be, because we don't want them creating their own role. There's a lot of organizations already working it.
That's the reason why it had to be brought up today, so we could look, towards the future and stuff, be able to find those funding for it. Both those
Okay.
particular
Both of them?
items.
Okay. I do have I totally am on board with the biomass exploration. I think that's great. I do have I have some more questions about the click see fix or whatever it is, because I would be concerned that sometimes it might set up an expectation for the community. I know as constituents, call us with problems in our community. And that's kind of what we're for too. We're kind of the see, click, fix here as we, interface on those issues. But I can see the community, the ability to, click a pothole, click a road, a tree branch, that sets up an expectation that that's going to be fixed immediately because that has been called in. And recognizing that, we should be spending $4 million more in maintenance, that we might not have those resources to fix all of the issues that residents see, which then sets up a really negative interface with the county. So I think we need to be careful about that.
But that's why I brought it up today, so we could look into it. And do a
Yeah,
little bit
I have
more
a
studying on
strong
it.
concern about that portion of
I
it.
understand
Yeah.
that.
So
Cities have the ability to create new taxes and stuff much better than counties,
Than we
which can
do,
fund
yeah.
these things when the
Right.
residents really want it. So I mean, that's why I believe it's probably highly used in some cities in California, but not a single county do we know of yet that's using that particular app.
and if we were going to roll that out countywide with 1,800 miles, can you imagine what that impact on our staff could be? So I just have a concern about that.
So I'd like, as Supervisor Turnbull, you just said you want staff to look into it. I'm going to suggest staff has looked into it.
Oh, they have.
And staff's recommendation, for reasons Raphael stated, and in conversations my office had with the city of Folsom, when you expand it to a county of 1,800 square miles, we're going to get constituent complaints or concerns, which I do not want to diminish at all, that they're important, they're valid. But when there are going to be concerns about things going on in the city of South Lake Tahoe, the city of Placerville, on Caltrans roadways, we will have to hire staff to field those concerns and refer those concerns to the appropriate agencies. And then another concern in talking to DOT is we don't have the resources, and this is going to be a very simplistic statement to try and make a point, but we don't have the resources to fill all the potholes we know exist.
Yeah.
If we get complaints of more potholes, it doesn't help us. And if we're hiring staff to field those complaints, that's taking money away from the actual service. So that's what we're trying to balance, but that's why staff is not recommending move forward with C-Click Fix at this time.
The only thing is the 211 system, it just seems like it doesn't work that well. You know what I mean?
Well,
And
it
this-
wasn't
and this-
intended for this particular
Oh, I
purpose, but
know.
it's part of multiple methods to
Right.
communicate with the county. So, okay, so you're not going to take any additional action on the C-Click Fixer now. You have a recommendation
Unless you direct me
to
to.
monitor its development, I guess, its evolution, and determine at some point in time if it's appropriate, then bring it back.
I think that's a good approach because that's kind of what happened with the body cams. If you think about it, the sheriff was approached about that years ago. And he at that time felt that, the policies and the technology just weren't quite there. He monitored it over the last several years, and this year it was go time. So I'm thinking that this type of app is kind of the same thing for counties anyway, is to see what's out there. Apps are evolving so quickly right now that maybe we just take a wait and see on it and keep an eye on some of them. Because I'd be hesitant to be the first county out there to adopt something.
Well, yeah, the other thing is I'm concerned that 911 calls should go to 911. And if people start using an app because it's convenient and they start using that to report crime at scenes, accidents, those kinds of things, then we have a delay in the response time. And that's not a good thing to add into the middle. So you have to be very careful what that app is efficient at doing or helping with, as opposed to other tools that are already in place. Code Red, I mean, all of those kinds of tools that we have. You don't want to have separate conversations if it's not consistent with what that primary information source is, right? That just creates more confusion. So
Yeah, and
it's
I
an
think-
interesting world we live in.
I understand, but you got to understand, it is the 21st century too. So we
Yep.
need to look forward to, I mean, it's now, it's the age, look at our phones, look at how much they've progressed in just a few years, you know? So anyway.
And that was my only point is there are a lot of apps and there's contractors, consultants. We can get really crazy into to analyzing a lot of this. And I just want to make sure if we are going to do this, that we get the right program, that it's a good fit for our county. Because there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of different businesses out there that might fit us.
Yeah, and I agree with Wendy's comments. It creates an expectation. Vegetation management is a category we haven't talked about, but as soon as something like that's available, I mean, it gets inundated with all of these requests for service for vegetation management, and we don't have the resources to respond to all. We've recognized it's a multi-year phase in, and we're trying to help the public, be successful in getting their appropriate defensible space. But we recognize you couldn't just flip a switch and it was all going to happen. It's going to take a while, and we're going to have to continually to look at revenue sources to help, which we're doing with our fire safe councils and other things, right? So there's a lot of activity there, but if you create an expectation that one click and something's going to happen in a reasonable period of time with the available resources we have in this county, it is a false expectation. And I don't want to.
Maybe we should rename that app see, click, and we'll try.
We'll try maybe.
The app.
See, click and hope. Hope is not a strategy.
We'll do our best. I don't know.
Pray is not a strategy.
You're right, though. The name itself does set up a false expectation.
It does.
There you
does.
go.
Yeah, can I do this with my home maintenance?
And Lori was right. It seems like we get these emails every day from our constituents and stuff, and they have concerns, and we direct them, to code enforcement or to building or planning, and I don't know if this app would be anything to do where they would bypass that if they needed something done. So I don't know.
I don't know either.
It's something
It's a mix. Yeah.
we can look into a little more and,
Okay. So
Okay.
we're not going to do anything today relative to that. We'll determine what's appropriate relative to
Right.
the additional resources in either category. It sounds like we're not talking about the C-click fix as a change, but potentially adding some staff to help with the Myobass studies, the exploration, whatever you want to call it, the collaboration with other existing organizations, and making sure we're at the table and playing our part in that role and helping facilitate it. But we can't lead it. I can tell you that it's too big of a venture to take it on. So final call, any additional board comments relative to the current budget? I think we've answered all the public input, and I don't see any actions coming of this. So I don't see any new direction, at least I haven't heard any. So I think it's kind of a receive and file type of activity, or would you like a
gosh,
motion?
No.
There's a ton of stuff here. And then.
Okay,
do
all
we-
right,
do we
that was
need
the 7 items that we did.
Yeah,
All right,
and-
so should we do those incrementally or all at once?
Do we close the hearing now, though, or?
I
do
already
we
closed the hearing
close the
for public
hearing?
comment.
Okay.
Right.
So then, there was like 7 things.
Okay, so on the 7 things that we have, do you want to take them incrementally or do them all in one motion? I think
If
we'd
there's
probably do them all.
if there's no concerns with anyone, you can do it all in
I
one
don't see
motion.
any
So everybody's good on 1 through 7? Then I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve as recommended.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion moving second. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Heidel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Turnbull, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Thomas, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Parlin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Novacell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Very good. So with that, do we want to take a break and then come back, or?
Yes, we do.
All right, so let's take a 10-minute, well, let's make it a couple more. Let's come back at 11:25. That's 13 minutes. That'll give us a chance to get some exercise and move around a little bit, and then come back and we'll take on item 2, department matters. Thank you.
Very good.
Still haven't got our video fixed, huh?
All right, so we are back after a short break and we are going to move to department matters now. Item number 2, Kim, would you please read that?
Of course. Item number 2 comes to the Department of Transportation and Chief Administrative Office, Facilities Division, recommending the board, 1, receive an update on the Department of Transportation Cherokee Garage Replacement Project, and 2, provide direction on increased funding required.
So Raphael, you're back.
Yes, I am. Good
Different
morning.
subjects, same setting.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors. Rafael Martinez, Director of Transportation for El Dorado County. As many of you know, the Department of Transportation has 2 primary locations where it houses much of its supplies and equipment. One is here in the Placerville area off of Headington Road. The other is in the Tahoe area in the region of Myers off of Shakori Road. An integral part of the Shakori facility is its 14-bay garage. As early as 2016, the Facilities Division, along with DOT, determined that we needed to make plans on the repair or the replacement of that garage. So based on a value engineering analysis, the structure, which I think was analyzed in 2019, December of 2019, the decision was made to replace the building instead of repairing it. Some of the factors that we used to arrive to that conclusion were the narrow bay widths and depths, the lack of coverage, storage area for supplies and parts, the lack of covered storage for servicing equipment, and just essentially the severe structural deficiencies of the building itself. So on January of 2020, the Board of Supervisors approved a $2.5 million project on what was at the time a slightly modified footprint for a conceptual garage. Well, since then, staff has met with the architects of the project, Williams and Pardon, to scope out that footprint of the new building. And due to the increase in size of equipment that DOT now uses, as well as the need for servicing equipment in a sheltered area, in particularly in snow country, the size of the building has grown by about 34%. Combining that with the increase, as was mentioned earlier today, in lumber, steel, and concrete, the estimated new cost of the building is now calculated to be $3.5 million. So essentially, we have a $1 million increase from the original estimate that was brought to the board back in January of 2020. Now, the good news is that it seems that as of about a month, the lumber, steel costs have plateaued. So we are hopeful that price increases don't go too much higher from here. Not to mention, we've also calculated a $400,000 contingency into that $3.5 million estimate. But ultimately, staff feels that if we are to be looking to the future to properly maintain and manage and administer our equipment, we need a building that will provide us the future expansion and be able to not be obsolete within a few years of being built. With changes in size of equipment that we plan on using, with the use of attachments, with new electric equipment that is every day becoming much more relevant and prevalent in our daily use, we feel that it is appropriate to move forward with this building scope and its footprint and the project estimated cost of $3.5 million. So with that, it concludes my presentation. I'm here along with Chuck Harrell from Facilities and Brian Mullins, my Deputy Director of Operations and Maintenance, to answer any of your questions that you might have.
So questions from the board first.
Well, I gotta say something. And go ahead, Sue. I'll let you go first.
Oh, I'm sorry, George.
Oh, it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, okay. I just want to make a comment. When we toured this facility years ago, I don't think George or whether you were on the board, but if we could see some pictures of it, you can see just what kind of shape our employees are dealing with in there. There are literally holes in the wall, holes in the roof. It's a pretty messy situation. I don't know, Raphael, if you have some. Yeah, it's in very, very bad shape. It was years ago when we toured it, and it was kind of shocking to see that our employees are living in this kind of environment. So that was the urgency years ago to get this replaced, is that it's in bad shape. And I understand with the price of the cost going up so dramatically lately that this is really bad timing. As far as trying to get a project done in the midst of this. But at the same time, I think it's incumbent upon us to understand that our employees are in a situation where we shouldn't be holding them to living and working in this environment. It shouldn't have happened. This should have happened years ago to get this fixed. And so I don't have a real good answer here with the increase in the cost. Perhaps there's a way to look at decreasing the size and scope if that is such a concern. But in my mind, this should have been done 10 years ago. So I'm very much concerned about not moving forward with this at this time. And that I just want to make that statement. Thank you. Thanks, George.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Novosel. And Supervisor Turnbull, before I get to your comment, Supervisor Novosel brought up some of the pictures. And can you see my screen right now?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so essentially this is the 14 bay garage. As you can see, it's a flat roof and in snow country. So as you can imagine, we have a significant amount of structural decay happening on the roof, as well as multiple locations where it's leaking. Just to show you some of the issues that we have. These are all due to either loader or grader strikes against the walls that my staff has patched up through the years because of the fact that equipment has gotten larger over the years. And this building was built 47 years ago. So we just barely are able to get our existing equipment into these bays, let alone any larger loaders or graders that we want to look into incorporating in the future. I don't know if you could see that right there, but the red circle is illustrating a light that is shining through the wall, the masonry wall. So you can imagine there is major structural damage to the integrity of this building. Here is some of the decaying of the roofing and the ceiling of the building itself. As I said, it's a flat roof in snow country. So essentially, it is no joke. I know it really is leaking like a sieve in terms of the amount of damage and decaying of the roofing, as well as all the insulation that is on the roof and ceiling as well. And then, as you can see here, many of the columns that are in the inner bays have been struck by our loaders and our graders and have caused structural damage to the columns in themselves, as well as you could see some of the decay once again to the ceiling of the building. And that concludes my pictures that I have. So that is the reason why, after seeing the condition of the building, the board decided last year to move forward with replacement of that facility. So Supervisor Turnbull, I believe you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, the biggest thing is, and I can understand the concerns because those bay doors are really, really small and very narrow. And it's hard to get equipment in there safely, you know, and especially walking between the door and the equipment and stuff too. So, and then the biggest thing you were talking about, the flat roof, and then my concern is the black mold, especially if that roof is leaking like that it is, and it can create a big problem with that, especially when the employees are breathing that kind of stuff. So, especially the spores coming off of that mold. So
that is a problem. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. And like I say, especially we got to have a place that's going to be adequate, especially if we're leasing this equipment, because we're still responsible for it. And it's got to be locked into a facility. And if there's any damage and stuff like that to that facility, that's, you know, our insurance will cover it, sure, but that could drive our insurance costs up too. So we got to look at the safety of the equipment and also the safety of our employees. So I think we need to move forward with this thing. We really do. We got to get this done.
Thank you.
And I know the cost of material has increased, you know, $1 million, but we can't go another year without getting this completed and get it finished.
Thank you.
Other board questions or comments?
Nope, I agree.
I have one that talks about extensive removal and replacement of the undocumented fill under the entire building foundation. So how much excavation are we talking about?
You know, I think I'll hand that over to Chuck to go into some details on that.
Chuck,
Charles,
you're
you
muted.
You're muted.
We can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. Originally, when we talked about with the civil on the plans, they originally looked at the existing conditions and the original plan set, and they wanted to dig out 5 feet of undocumented fill under the existing facility, which was a little tough for me just because we've had a facility sitting on it for, 50 years. After going back and forth with them a little bit and a few more tests, we basically got that down to about 2 feet of undocumented fill, 2 to 3 feet that we're going to have to dig out and recompact back to 90%.
Okay, that's reasonable. I was just afraid that you were going to go really deep if you had that much undocumented fill. So
yeah, so were we. So we've got that. It looks like
the right approach, and obviously the compaction is the key thing, and there'll be testing of that, so we know we've got a good solid.
Correct. Yep.
I guess the other thing I would just bring up are recognizing that the Tahoe Basin is an area where radon is common. Have we considered the construction and how to minimize radon intrusion into this building as part of the construction phase as opposed to an afterthought?
Right now, we're at the programming and very schematic design on this. Our next phase on this is going to get into more heavy design documents and finally construction documents, and that will be something we'll be looking into.
Okay, and I'm assuming this is a custom design. This is not a steel building that we're going to erect around a special foundation or anything else. Can you give me just an idea of the construction concept?
It is a structural steel building. It is not what you'd say out of the box. So it is a custom designed structural steel building. Something once we get the CDs that the general contractor that is awarded the job can basically order that steel package from the manufacturer for this thing, but it isn't something that's just off the shelf necessarily. So it is structural steel with a slab foundation.
So we've considered the need for overhead cranes and all those things is because I want to make sure we do the design right? You don't want to come
absolutely. It's like,
gosh, if we just put a crane in here, it'd be really nice to be able to remove this part and locate it on the floor and get something done. So I just want to make sure we've totally thought through the utility of that particular, this construction and have accommodated those things, at least as an option to be added later, with the proper construction design criteria. So that's the name of the game anymore. Look at modular stuff, right? But make sure you can add on easily if you have additional needs in the future. As best you can forecast what they may be. So,
absolutely. I mean, we're looking at this as a facility that's going to be it's probably going to be 50, 60, even 70 years that they're going to be using this. So we want to try to get it as close to right as we can.
Yeah, all right, very good. So George?
Yeah, another issue and stuff is the contamination, especially with the spillage of oil and fuel over the years and stuff like that, especially if you got to dig out that, I'm sure you're going to probably run into some of that contamination when you remove that, dig down 2 feet or 5 feet or whatever you have to do. I'm sure you're going to run into some of that too. Have you already tested any of that around that?
We've done a phase 1 on the facility. The existing shop right now does have floor drains which go to a sand oil separator. So I'm not expecting a great deal of contamination. I'm probably jinxing myself in saying that, but it appears that it was set up and built to handle that originally, and it's going to be going back to a sand oil separator with floor drains again.
Well, I know that was probably put in prior, later in the years and stuff like that, because it wasn't required back in the old days in these shops. And that particular building, wasn't it built in the 60s? Is that correct or not correct?
I'm going to say it was in the 70s.
I think it said 19.
But I believe that it always, well, I can tell you this, it's got floor drains that go out the back currently, and that those head to a sand oil separator. Where those headed to originally, I don't know.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, the Legistar document says built in 1974.
74,
So,
okay.
Yeah. And unfortunately, built it with a wood post and beam kind of construction, and it just kind of probably missed the mark from the start.
Totally understand.
Okay, other board comments or questions? Sue, did you have anything else?
No, I'm good. Unless anybody has any more questions, I can answer. I do live a mile down the street from this place, and it's anybody that lives in Tahoe that sees flat roofs around them. I can't understand why it's still up, actually still up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, with snow loads and everything else. And then the added earthquake hazard with snow loads. I mean, a lot of things that go into proper construction methods today as opposed to what they were in 1974. So it's going to cost, obviously. All right, not seeing any other board comments or questions. Let's open it up to the public, please, Kim.
Now taking public comment on item number 2. Please make sure you unmute yourself when called upon. Individuals will have 3 minutes to address the board. If you're joining the meeting by phone, press *9 to indicate a desire to comment. If you're joining by Zoom, press the raise hand button. Please voluntarily state your name for the record. There's no public comment.
All right, back to the board. Go ahead, Sue, please.
So Tara, I'd like to go ahead and approve this item, please. Move to approve this item.
I'll second it.
All right. So with that, Kim, we have roll call, please.
The Supervisor Heidel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Turnboot, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Thomas, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Parlin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Novosel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, good start. And the El Dorado Center will come in its own due time, right?
All right. Talk to you later, you guys.
Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate it. Thank you, Raphael. All right, Kim, if you would read item 3, please.
Item number 3 comes from the Chief Administrative Office and Health and Human Services Agency, recommending the board consider the following. 1, authorize the use in general fund savings to increase the designation for the El Dorado Center building project in South Lake Tahoe. And 2, approve and authorize the chair to sign a budget transfer to A, increase general fund designations for the El Dorado Center building project, B, increase transfers out of Department 15, and C, increase transfers into the Sheriff's Office and Public Health.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As I think you all remember, last spring, the CARES Act was signed into law by the president. Following that, the board adopted a spending plan in August to get that $19 million spent by the deadline of December 30th, 2020. After that deadline had passed and we had done all the reporting and sort of closed out those activities, we had identified about $2.6 million in general fund savings that had been generated through the use of that CARES Act funding for other activities. We came to your board in March to get some direction on the use of that savings. At that point, we got direction to use about $1.3 million of it. Big portion of that was to swap out the use of regular general fund for the audit reserve, the $800,000 to use with this funding. The remainder, at that point, we said we would wait and discuss later when we had more details about the American Rescue Plan Act. We now have a lot of that information, and it really has taken on a life of its own. So we've decided to separate the two discussions, and with this item before you, we'll kind of close out the CARES Act. Our recommendation is to set aside that funding in a designation for the El Dorado Center, as we just alluded to having that need. And the link there is that obviously public health has been hit very hard by the activities needed to mitigate the coronavirus. And so to the extent that that might cause them to have to use additional realignment funding, which we had identified as a major source for the El Dorado Center, we're going to backfill that with this designation so that it would mitigate the depletion, if any, on those realignment funds. The budget transfers really just, again, it's kind of a closeout action. So we reported a lot of the funding as used to offset public health and public safety salaries. So we're just aligning the budget with those reporting requirements that we had with the state. And I think that's it. If you have any questions for me.
And there's no federal approvals or anything else required for this, right? It's all within our jurisdiction to go ahead and authorize it. So very good.
Right.
Questions from anybody? Sue, did you have any questions on this one?
No, not really. Just general comment that this is a backfill from the HHSA with the funding they've already were saying they were going to provide for this project. It's again, very, very much needed. We don't have pictures probably of what the El Dorado Center looks like, but I can guarantee you it's about in the same shape as Shakori. It's
Yeah,
pretty
about the
scary
same
looking
vintage,
place.
Same kind of construction.
Yeah.
method. So, yeah, there's a lot
They
of
have an
common-
elevator. They have an elevator that no one wants to get on. Let's put it that way. Okay. It's pretty
Yeah.
bad.
All right, very good. So with that, Kim, please open it up for public comment.
Now taking public comment on item number 3. Please make sure you unmute yourself when called upon. Individuals will have 3 minutes to address the board. If you're joining the meeting by phone, press *9 to indicate a desire to comment. If you're joining by Zoom, press the raise hand button. Please voluntarily state your name for the record. There's no public comment.
All right, very good. Back to the board for action.
I will move to approve. Second?
A motion second, roll call, please.
Supervisor Hydall, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Turnbull, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Thomas, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Parlin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Supervisor Novosel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Very good. So we've completed our business for today. And so with that, I will adjourn this meeting at 11:50 a.m. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. See you all tomorrow.
All right. Bye, Sue.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.